Chapter 1097. 1097 Chapter 1097 Transfer to the Law Enforcement Army. It seems that I can't use this identity. Lu Ming's eyes turned cold. He planned to take action directly and kill Shi Jing, Shi Fang, and Xie Jin together. At this moment Hi, eighth brother, what's up? Why is it so lively? A loud laugh was heard, and then a rumble came from the sky, as if thousands of soldiers and horses were galloping over. There were about a few hundred cavalrymen, each of them riding a fiery red warhorse. These warhorses were covered in fiery red scales, and there were 2 dragon horns on their heads. Flames were dancing all over their bodies, making them look very mighty. This was a dragon horse, and it was said that it had the bloodline of a true dragon. A powerful dragon horse was no weaker than a flood dragon. There were hundreds of people, all of them riding dragon horses. The leader was a young man with a slender figure. He was wearing fiery red armor and fiery boots. His hair was loose and his eyes were like lightning. His aura was powerful. 10th Prince. Many people cried out in alarm. Boom, boom, boom. The dragon horse stomped on the air and appeared above the military camp. Your subordinate greets the 10th Prince. Shi Jing, Shi Fang, and the others quickly knelt down in the 10th Prince's heart, their eyes filled with respect. 10th brother, why have you come? Xie Jin's expression was a little ugly. As he looked at the young man before him, there was a hint of jealousy and respect in the depths of his eyes. The 10th Prince, Xie Yan, was a peerless heaven's favorite. Among all the children of the current Saint Emperor, he was one of the top existences. He was a second-class heaven's favorite whose name shook the central continent. His cultivation was powerful, and he had even stepped into the spiritual god realm. His status in the ancient Saint dynasty was not something that Xie Jin could compare to. In the imperial family, Xie Yan's existence was second only to Xian Yanjuan. 8th brother, you can come here to hunt but I can't? What are you guys doing? It seems like he wants to attack one of your subordinates. What's going on? You tell me. The 10th Prince, Xie Yan, pointed at one of the imperial dragon guards and ordered. His tone was arrogant and unquestionable. The imperial dragon guard didn't dare to show the slightest neglect, nor did he dare to hide anything. He recounted the entire matter. So that's how it is. 8th brother, you're becoming more and more useless. You can't even beat a 7th level spirit embryo vice flag. If you can't beat it, then so be it. We agreed to fight, but if you lose, you want to kill someone else. If this matter were to spread, wouldn't my sage emperor clan become a joke? Xie Yan indifferently said. 10th brother, you've misunderstood. I didn't mean to kill him. Just now, guard Shi Jing saw that I was injured and was worried. That's why he stood in front of me to protect me. It's all a misunderstanding. Xie Jin's expression changed before he revealed an ugly smile. Oh really? So it was just a misunderstanding. This deputy banner has good combat strength. He's only 1 level higher than 8th brother, but he can easily crush 8th brother. He's a talent. Xie Yan said with a smile. Xie Jin's fists were clenched so tightly that cracking sounds could be heard. He was furious. He took a deep breath to calm himself down and smiled. Not bad, this deputy banner of the Bright Road has good combat power. Therefore, I plan to transfer him to the law enforcement army. The million-year national sacrifice is about to begin. When the time comes, the holy city will be in chaos. The law enforcement army is in need of manpower. Hearing this, Shi Fang and Shi Jing's eyes lit up and they sneered. The others looked at Lu Ming with pity. Lu Ming's heart skipped a beat. What did these looks mean? He's your man, 8th brother. You can do whatever you want with him. I'm leaving. Xie Yan smiled and led the 400 cavalrymen towards Beast Cry Mountain. After Xie Yan left, Xie Zhen's expression darkened. He coldly glanced at Lu Ming and said, Vice Banner Ming, go back and wait. The order will come soon. You will go to the law enforcement army and be a commander. With your combat strength, it's enough. As soon as he said that, the expressions of the people around him became even stranger. They looked at Lu Ming with even more pity. Also, you will be transferred to the law enforcement army with him. Then, Xie pointed at Sun Lin. Plop. Sun Lin's expression changed drastically, and he immediately knelt down with a plop. He kowtowed and cried out in pain, "No, 8th Prince, I'm begging you, please don't transfer me to the law enforcement army. I'm only living with him, I don't know him." You want to disobey this prince's orders. Xie eyes turned cold. Sun Lin's face was pale as he stood there, stunned. "Let's go." Xie rose into the air and returned to the mansion. The others quickly followed. "AI, Minglu, I'm really going to be killed by you." Sun Lin let out a long sigh, his face full of dejection. "What's going on? Why don't you want to join the law enforcement army? From the name, the law enforcement army should have a lot of power." Lu Ming asked curiously. Many sects had law enforcement halls, which had great power and could enforce the law on behalf of the sect. Everyone respected them. Why did Sun Lin seem to be very afraid of joining the law enforcement army? Moreover, when the others heard that Xie wanted to transfer Lu Ming to the law enforcement army, they all looked at him with pity. He was somewhat baffled. "AI, you don't know this, but the law enforcement army does have a lot of power, but it's useless now." Sun Lin sighed and continued to explain. The law enforcement army is the law enforcement agency of the ancient Saint dynasty. They are responsible for the law enforcement of the entire Saint city and maintaining the law and order. No matter who it is, no matter which power they are from, if they commit a crime in the Saint city, the law enforcement army will be dispatched to enforce the law. Lu Ming nodded. Wasn't this a lot of power? 30,000 years ago, when the ancient Saint dynasty ruled the world, the law enforcement army was indeed fearsome and powerful. Whoever dared to commit a crime would be suppressed or even killed on the spot. At that time, everyone wanted to join the law enforcement army. As long as you joined the army, everyone would be afraid of you. But now, the ancient Saint dynasty is weak, and the various emperors are all powerful. The law enforcement army is in an awkward position. For example, if the disciples of the major forces commit a crime, will the law enforcement army take action or not? If we don't do anything, the law enforcement army will represent the face of the ancient Saint dynasty, and the royal family might blame us for it. However, if we do, the experts from the major powers will put pressure on the royal family, and under the pressure, the royal family will hand over the law enforcement army to appease the other party. In that case, who would be willing to go? Sun Lin explained. Lu Ming was suddenly enlightened. He finally understood. The main reason was that the ancient Saint dynasty was weak now, and they did not dare to offend those powerful forces. If that was the case, the authority of the law enforcement army would basically be useless. If they did not make a move, it would be equivalent to throwing the face of the ancient Saint dynasty. If they did, the people from the major powers would be powerful enough to put pressure on the law enforcement army. If the law enforcement army made a move, they would become the scapegoats. No matter what he did, it would be wrong. He would be jumping into the fire pit no matter what he did. It was no wonder that the others were in such a state when they heard that Lu Ming would be transferred to the law enforcement army. Sigh, once I'm transferred into the law enforcement army, it's over. Furthermore, the million-year national sacrifice is coming. When that time comes, the holy city will be in chaos, and all the major factions of the divine wilderness continent will gather. It will definitely be chaotic. It's a dead end. Sun Lin sighed and rose into the air with a dejected expression. Chapter 1098. 1098 Chapter 1098, A Group of Poor Ghosts. 3 days later, the transfer order was officially issued. Lu Ming was transferred to the law enforcement army as the commander, leading a team of 100 people with Sun Lin following. Lu Ming took the transfer order and set off with Sun Lin. Lu Ming did not feel anything. To him, the law enforcement army was better and he had more freedom. He could walk around the holy city as he pleased. He would definitely be able to obtain more information. Sun Lin, on the other hand, was listless and looked like he had a bleak future. Not long after, the two of them arrived at the place where the law enforcement army was stationed, The law enforcement hall. There were many law enforcement halls in the Holy City. A team of 100 people was led by a commander. They were stationed in one law enforcement hall and were responsible for law enforcement missions in a certain area of the Holy City. Lu Ming was the leader of this law enforcement team. He was mainly in charge of the northeast area of the Holy City. The moment Lu Ming entered, he saw a few figures sitting listlessly in the law enforcement hall. He did not see anyone else. When they saw Lu Ming and the rest, they only took a casual glance at Lu Ming and continued to sit listlessly. There are only a few of you. Where are the others? Lu Ming frowned. One of them glanced at Lu Ming and said, "Who are you? Don't you know that it's a serious crime to break into the law enforcement hall without permission? I am the new commander. Let me ask you, where are the others?" Lu Ming took out a token and shouted coldly, "A new commander." Their eyes suddenly lit up, shining with greed. The blazing fire seemed to have invigorated them all, and they stood up one after another. "A new commander has arrived. Brothers, come out. We have money to spend again," someone shouted. His voice spread far and wide. As soon as his voice fell, the sound of breaking air rang out. Figures rushed out from various rooms and from all corners of the law enforcement hall. There were a total of 80 to 90 people. As soon as these people appeared, they stared at Lu Ming and Sun Lin with fiery eyes, as if they were burly men who had been thirsty for decades and had just seen a peerless and enchanting beauty. "Ha, another unlucky fellow has been transferred here, and it's a commander. You've come at the right time. Take out all your raw gemstones and treasures and share them with your brothers." A brawny man who looked like an ape stepped out. His muscles bulged and he glared at Lu Ming with a fierce gaze. "Hee, you're only a 7th level spirit embryo realm martial artist, yet you were transferred here to be a commander. I really don't know who you've offended, but no matter who you've offended, since you're here, hand over all your origin stones and treasures." A white-haired old man in his 60s sneered. "Ha, after we get the raw stone, let's go and have a good meal and enjoy our slaviers. How about it?" "That's for sure. Damn it, I haven't enjoyed it in a long time." The rest of the people were also in an uproar. They were all talking and looking at Lu Ming as if he was a piece of fat meat. Sun Lin's face was pale and Lu Ming was dumbfounded. Was this the law enforcement army? This was the law enforcement hall. Lu Ming almost thought that he had come to a bandit's lair. These people actually wanted to rob him. After observing carefully, he realized that this was undoubtedly the law enforcement hall. "You guys want to rob me?" Lu Ming's face revealed an inexplicable smile. "You can understand it that way. Hurry up or my fist will start to itch." The gorilla-like man glared at Lu Ming unkindly. The smile on Lu Ming's face grew wider. He swept his gaze across the room and said, "If that's the case, then fine. Now I'll rob you. Hand over all your storage rings." What did you just say?" As soon as Lu Ming said that, the entire place fell silent. Everyone looked at Lu Ming with their mouths agape. After a while, everyone burst into laughter. "Ha, I didn't hear wrongly, right? This 7th level spirit embryo realm guy actually wants to rob us? Who does he think he is? Did he really think of himself as a commander? Aren't you just as unlucky as us? You've offended someone you shouldn't have." What a joke. Bang! The black gorilla man took a step forward and his aura burst out. He waved his hand and grabbed Lu Ming. This person's cultivation was at the great circle of the spirit embryo realm. Among this group of people, he was at the top. "Let's see what you can do." The black gorilla man revealed a savage expression. Lu Ming's eyes turned cold. He stretched out a hand and grabbed the black gorilla man's wrist at lightning speed. His vital essence burst forth and he grabbed the black gorilla man and threw him. Boom! The black gorilla man was like a sandbag, heavily smashing onto the ground, causing the entire law enforcement hall to shake violently. If it wasn't for the powerful array inscribed in the law enforcement hall, it would have exploded. The black gorilla man fell to the ground and screamed. His cultivation and essential core were extremely fragile in Lu Ming's hands. They had been completely scattered by Lu Ming. At this moment his whole body seemed to be falling apart. He had no strength at all as he lay on the ground and wailed. There was a sudden silence and everyone looked at Lu Ming in shock. The black gorilla man had a cultivation of the great circle of the spirit embryo realm, but he was actually defeated without any resistance in one move. How was this possible? Brothers, let's attack together. This person's combat strength is profound, and he must have a lot of money on him. Let's attack. The white-haired old man shouted and the 80 to 90 law enforcement soldiers followed suit. They swarmed toward Lu Ming. Bang! Lu Ming took a step forward and dashed over like a stream of light, his palms striking out. Pa! Pa! In the law enforcement hall, the sound of rapid slapping as well as wails and screams were mixed together. In less than a minute, 80 to 90 law enforcement soldiers were lying all over the law enforcement hall, wailing on the ground. One side of their faces was puffed up, and they looked extremely miserable. Sun Lin was dumbfounded by this scene, his mouth wide open. Was Lu Ming's cultivation at the 7th level of spirit embryo realm? Wasn't his combat strength a little too strong? In this group of law enforcement soldiers, there were 5 to 6 people with great perfection in their spirit embryo realm. The others were at least experts of the 4th level spirit embryo realm. However, they were completely defeated by Lu Ming in less than a minute. They were as weak as babies. This was too terrifying. He felt that his brain was a little confused. You dare to fight with your father, you're looking for death. Lu Ming shouted coldly. Lu Ming now had the image of a burly man with a full beard. At this moment, his glare was rather intimidating. He clenched his fist in the air and his essential core burst forth. The storage rings on the fingers of these law enforcement soldiers were all sucked over by Lu Ming. If they wanted to rob him, they had to be prepared to be robbed by him. First, Lu Ming picked up the storage ring of the black gorilla man and scanned it with his spiritual senses. He was dumbfounded. Aren't you a little too poor? Lu Ming glared at the gorilla man, completely speechless. In the storage ring of the black gorilla man, there was almost nothing except for a few spiritual crystals. There were no raw stones. He didn't have any good spirit weapons. Not to mention precious pills and materials, there was nothing. In any case, this was a storage ring with a great circle of spirit embryo realm. How could it be so poor? Next, Lu Ming looked at the other people's storage rings. Many of them were even poorer than the gorilla man. Lu Ming was dumbfounded. They were too poor. The lowest cultivation among these people was the 4th level spirit embryo realm. Why did it feel like they were even poorer than some martial king realm martial artists? Chapter 1099. 1099 The Miserable Law Enforcement Army. Lu Ming scanned through dozens of storage rings and found that they were almost the same. The contents were simply too tragic to gamble. They did not look like the storage rings of martial artists at the 4th level of the spirit embryo realm and above. At the sight of Lu Ming's dumbfounded look, the gorilla man and the rest looked embarrassed. With a wave of his hand, all the storage rings flew back into the hands of the black gorilla man and the others. Get up, stop pretending to be dead. Lu Ming swept his gaze across the room and said coldly. Lu Ming had not hit them hard just now. He had only temporarily scattered their essential core. It was not a big deal. No matter what, Lu Ming was now the commander of these people. He could not just kill them the moment he came. Only then did the black gorilla man and the others get up from the ground. Commander's battle prowess is profound. This subordinate is truly in admiration. As soon as he got up, the black gorilla man revealed a simple and honest smile, which was completely different from the wild and violent expression he had earlier. That's right, that's right. The commander's cultivation is unparalleled. He was able to take care of us in a few moves. This is the first time this subordinate has seen something like this in all my years of life. The white-haired old man also flattered. The commander is invincible. The commander is mighty. The other law enforcement officers were also flattering him. Lu Ming's eyelids were twitching. He was rather speechless. Who are these people? Just now, she wanted to rob him, but now she changed her face so quickly. Why are you so poor? There isn't even a single raw gemstone in the storage ring? Lu Ming asked curiously. AI. Our law enforcement army is so hard. Commander, it's like this. The crowd chimed in and explained to Lu Ming. After listening to the story, Lu Ming fell into deep thought. The law enforcement army's days were worse than what Sun Lin had said. The law enforcement army had to enforce the law in the sacred city and protect the dignity of the ancient Saint dynasty. But now that the ancient Saint dynasty was on the decline, even though it was still a dominant power, or even the strongest dominant power, it was still just a dominant power. It no longer had the strength to rule the world. Hence, when it did things, it had to be careful and maintain a good relationship with the other powers. Therefore, when the people of the big forces committed a crime, the law enforcement army did not dare to really arrest and punish them, but they had to protect the face of the imperial family. What could they do? Therefore, most of the time, the law enforcement army could only pay out of their own pocket to give gifts to the disciples of the major forces and those who had committed crimes, asking them to do a good deed and apologize in public. In this way, the law enforcement army would naturally protect the face of the royal family, and the people who had committed the crime would admit their mistakes. The matter would be wrestle-levered just like that. However, they paid for it out of their own pockets. As time passed, it would be strange if the law enforcement army was not poor. It was no wonder that they wanted to rob Lu Ming the moment they saw him as a newcomer. Lu Ming was really quite speechless. The law enforcement army was too cowardly. The person who had committed the crime was fine, but they had to give the other party benefits. This was simply unheard of. The law enforcement army is used to enforce the law in the world on behalf of the ancient Saint dynasty. Unfortunately, the ancient Saint dynasty no longer has the power to do so. In fact, the law enforcement army could have been disbanded a long time ago, but the royal family has kept it for the sake of their dignity. However, no one is willing to come here. Usually, only those who have offended some big shots will be sent here. The white-haired old man sighed. Lu Ming finally knew why Xie Zhen had transferred him to the law enforcement army, and as a commander at that. It was getting closer and closer to the million-year national sacrifice. People from all the major forces had gathered. It was a period of trouble. If things went wrong, Lu Ming would offend someone and he would not even know how he died. Moreover, as a commander, the responsibility he had to bear was naturally greater. Xie Zhen, if you want to play, then have fun. Lu Ming's lips curled into a smile. He waved his hand and a storage ring flew towards the black gorilla man. Here are 10,000 oriroks. Use them to buy some fine wine and delicacies. Since we're new here, I'll treat everyone to a good meal. As for the excess, you can each buy a spirit weapon. These people were so poor that they had even sold their own spirit weapons. 10,000 raw gemstones. The black gorilla man received it. He was stunned at first, then he was overjoyed, saying, "Your subordinate thanks the commander." The others were overjoyed as well. They thanked Lu Ming and then went to buy fine wine, delicacies, and spirit weapons in joy. The fine wine and delicacies that martial artists ate were different from ordinary people. They were all from powerful fierce beasts and demonic beasts. The wine was also spirit wine. They were all very expensive. Half a day later, the burly black gorilla man and the rest brought back a large amount of fine wine and delicacies. The 80 to 90 people were divided into several tables and ate to their heart's content. It had been a long time since they had such a good meal and they were quite grateful to Lu Ming. Everyone ate and drank as they chatted. Through the chat, Lu Ming learned that these people had offended important figures and were sent here. They had families and friends in the holy city, but they couldn't escape. They could only suffer in the law enforcement army. Everyone ate and drank for a few hours. Not good. Someone destroyed a shop on North Street and killed the shopkeeper. He's still there. Suddenly, a law enforcement soldier rushed in to report the news. What? Who did this? This is troublesome. Something has happened again. The expressions of the black gorilla man and the others changed. What they were most afraid of was something happening, because if something happened, they could deal with some unknown people and directly take them down. However, if it was some big figure, they would be in trouble. It's the young master of the Huang family, Huang Ku. The messenger said. What? The Huang family is a family with many spiritual gods. What should we do? The expressions of the black gorilla man and the others changed. They could not afford to offend any force that had a spiritual god. Otherwise, the other party's spiritual god powerhouse could directly find their superiors and put pressure on them. Let's go and take a look. Lu Ming picked up a glass of wine and finished it. He strode out. You will go together. The gorilla man picked more than 10 people and followed Lu Ming out of the law enforcement hall. Their law enforcement hall was in the northeast of the Holy City. It was very close to North Street and would be there in a short while. On the way, Lu Ming also knew what was going on. The Huang family's young master, Huang Ku, had his eyes on a treasure in a shop, but there were no raw gemstones. He said that he would owe the shop and take the treasure first. Those who knew Huang Ku well knew that he had never returned anything he owed. The shopkeeper naturally didn't agree, so Huang Ku killed the shopkeeper, destroyed the shop, and even wanted to kill the shopkeeper's entire family. The moment he arrived, he heard an arrogant voice. Fuck, I'm giving you face, but you don't want it. I said I'll owe you first, so I'll owe you first. It's not like I won't pay you back, so why are you still not agreeing? You're looking for death, who can you blame? An arrogant voice sounded. Get lost. If you don't get lost, I'll kill you too. A deep voice rang out. It must have been Huang Ku's servant. Move aside, the law enforcement army is handling this matter, move aside. The black gorilla man roared and the crowd made way for Lu Ming to walk over. A white-haired old man was lying on the ground, no longer breathing. Beside the old man's corpse stood a young man in luxurious clothes. His eyes were cold and his face was cold and arrogant. Chapter 1100 1100 Chapter 1100 Punitive Expedition. This young man was Huang Ku. Behind Huang Ku, there was a burly man. At this moment, Huang Ku also saw Lu Ming and the rest. However, he did not show any fear. Instead, he sneered. What's going on? Lu Ming walked over and asked with a frown. So it's the law enforcement army. This person offended me and was beheaded by me. You can collect his body. Huang Ku put her hands behind her back and glanced at Lu Ming casually. You killed him? This person was running a shop in the Holy City and was under the protection of the law enforcement army. Why did you kill him? Come with us to the law enforcement hall and give us a good explanation. Lu Ming said coldly. What did you just say? You want to take me to the law enforcement hall? Huang Ku almost burst out laughing as if she had heard a very funny joke. She looked at Lu Ming in disbelief. On the side, the others were in a similar situation. The law enforcement hall dared to arrest Huang Ku? The Huang family was a big force in the sacred city. Now the law enforcement army was useless. Did they really dare to take Huang Ku down? Nonsense. Tai Xing, take him down. Lu Ming shouted. Tai Xing was the name of the black gorilla man. The black gorilla man revealed a difficult expression. Commander, it's not good to offend this Huang Ku. Tai Xing whispered in Lu Ming's ear. If you guys don't do it, I'll do it myself. Lu Ming's eyes turned cold and he stepped forward. You dare? Huang Ku shouted. Why wouldn't I? Lu Ming sneered. A mere law enforcement soldier. He's looking for death. Kill him. With a wave of Huang Ku's hand, the burly man behind him stepped forward. A violent aura burst forth, the aura of the 8th-level spirit embryo realm. Go to hell! The burly man bellowed with cold killing intent. He unsheathed his saber and slashed at Lu Ming's neck. You want to kill me? Lu Ming took a step forward and slapped. The space rumbled and the terrifying power broke through all of the burly man's defenses. A palm hit the burly man's chest, directly blasting a big hole in it. He let out a miserable scream and died with an incredulous expression. Even until his death, he still could not believe that the law enforcement army's trash had actually become so overbearing. You dare to? Huang Ku was so frightened that her face turned pale. She shivered and looked at Lu Ming in disbelief. If you want to kill me, you have to be killed by me. You asked him to kill me, so I'll cripple you first. Lu Ming's eyes were filled with killing intent. No, don't. Huang Ku was extremely frightened. Whoosh! Lu Ming flicked his fingers and a spear ray shot out, crippling Huang Ku's cultivation. Ah, you've destroyed my cultivation. I want you to die a horrible death. Huang Ku let out a shrill scream. On the side, the others were extremely shocked. This law enforcement army was completely different from the past. They were actually so ruthless and decisive. However, there were also many people secretly clapping their hands. Huang Ke had finally gotten his retribution for all the evil he had done by relying on his family's power. However, this law enforcement army was going to be in trouble soon, and the Huang family would not let this go. This. Behind Lu Ming, Tai Xing and the rest widened their eyes. They were at a loss. Although doing this made them feel very good and comfortable, now they were comfortable, but what would the consequences be? After crippling Huang Ku, the Huang family would probably go crazy. Lu Ming pulled Huang Ku's and the burly man's storage rings over and handed them to the two women. The old man and the young man were obviously the shopkeeper's family members. The two of them cried bitterly and looked helpless. Take these 2 storage rings and leave the holy city. Go live elsewhere. Lu Ming said as he handed the storage ring to the two of them. Thank you, my lord. The two of them thanked him repeatedly and quickly left the city. Tai Xing, bring this piece of trash back to the law enforcement hall. Lu Ming instructed, then turned around and headed to the law enforcement hall. Tai Xing and the others looked at each other. In the end, they gritted their teeth, picked up Huang Ku, and rushed back to the law enforcement hall. On the way, Huang Ku cried and cried, attracting the attention of many people. There's going to be a good show. The Huang clan will definitely fly into a rage and kill their way to the law enforcement hall. They probably won't attack the law enforcement army directly, but they'll put pressure on the higher-ups of the law enforcement army before attacking the law enforcement hall. Let's go and take a look. Let's go and take a look. Along the way, a large group of people followed behind Lu Ming and the rest as they headed to the law enforcement hall. Not long after, Lu Ming and the rest returned to the law enforcement hall. When the remaining law enforcement soldiers in the law enforcement hall saw this scene and heard what had happened, all of them were so scared that their faces turned pale. They were finished this time. How were they going to deal with the other party's experts when they came to kill them? Forget it, I can't hide, I'll go all out. But I'm still fucking happy. That's true, huh? The other members of the law enforcement hall were discussing in hushed voices. Lu Ming's expression was calm. He crossed his arms and closed his eyes to rest, waiting quietly. Meanwhile, the sky around the law enforcement hall was filled with people. Some were waiting quietly, while others were gloating. Time slowly passed. 2 hours later. The Huang family is here. Someone shouted. Buzz. At this moment, Lu Ming opened his eyes and looked at the sky. A total of 3 people stepped through the air. The 2 old men's clothes were very similar to Huang Ku's, so they should be experts of the Huang family. There was also a middle-aged man who was actually wearing the uniform of the law enforcement hall. It's the Lord Commander. Tai Xing's expression changed as he whispered into Lu Ming's ear. His so-called Lord Commander was the commander of the law enforcement army, commanding all the existing law enforcement troops in the Holy City. The law enforcement army's commander's face was as black as a pot. He looked at Lu Ming and chided, Minglu, why don't you release young Master Huang Ku? The law enforcement army's commander was in a bad mood. He was extremely upset, especially when he looked at Lu Ming. How could Lu Ming not know the current situation of the law enforcement army? Not only did he not apologize to the other party, but he also killed the Huang family's guards and crippled Huang Ku's cultivation. It would be strange if the Huang family didn't fly into a rage. The other party's spirit god powerhouse had come to him directly to put pressure on him. Release him? Commander, this man killed a shopkeeper on the street. The shopkeeper had to be protected by the ancient Saint dynasty if he was doing business in the Saint city. Otherwise, who would dare to do business in the Saint city in the future? I'm doing this impartially, why should I let him go? Lu Ming sneered in response. The other people from the law enforcement hall behind him were secretly worried for Lu Ming. The commander of the law enforcement army was a spiritual god powerhouse. Lu Ming actually dared to speak to a spiritual god powerhouse in this manner. As expected, Lu Ming's words made the commander of the law enforcement hall's face turn even gloomier. However, he could not find any words to refute. It was because Lu Ming was doing the right thing. Lu Ming was carrying out the duties of the law enforcement hall. As the commander of the law enforcement army, how could he refute that? Commander Chen, it seems like your subordinate doesn't listen to you at all. In that case, let me do it myself. I'll cripple this person's cultivation and bring him back to the Huang family to deal with him. An old man from the Huang family said indifferently. A killing intent flashed in his eyes. Chapter 1101. 1101 Chapter 1101 Apologize. First level of spiritual god realm. Lu Ming's lips curled into a cold smile. This elder from the Huang family had a cultivation of the first level of the spiritual god realm. Beside him was another elder from the Huang family, whose cultivation was even worse, only at the perfected spirit embryo realm. However, this person's aura was powerful and far beyond that of an ordinary great circle spirit embryo. Lu Ming speculated that this person must have awakened a divine-level bloodline but had not broken through to the spiritual god realm. He was at the level of an old monster and his combat strength was much stronger than an ordinary great circle spirit embryo. Bang! Lu Ming stepped on Huang Ku's face directly, making Huang Ku scream like a pig being slaughtered. How dare you! You even threatened to cripple me, the commander of the law enforcement army, in the law enforcement hall. You're simply disgraceful and should be killed. Lu Ming shouted and glared at him. With his full beard, he looked very righteous. He exerted force on his feet, causing Huang Ku's face to rub against the ground. Ah, forefather, save me! Huang Ku screamed in pain. Audacious evil beast, you're looking for death. The perfected spirit embryo elder from the Huang family shouted and took a step forward. His aura was violent and formed a huge palm that pressed down on Lu Ming. Not good, it's an old monster with a perfect spirit embryo. The expressions of Tai Xing and the others changed drastically. Tai Xing was also at the great circle of the spirit embryo realm, but compared to this great circle of the spirit embryo realm who had awakened a divine-level bloodline, there was a huge difference in battle prowess. However, Lu Ming's expression remained calm. He clenched his palm into a claw and clawed upward. With a poof, the elder's condensed palm instantly crumbled. Lu Ming's claw formed from essential core did not stop and clawed at the elder at an unbelievable speed. He caught the elder in his hand in an instant. Break! The elder's expression changed drastically. His divine-level bloodline appeared and he used the fusion of his bloodlines to release a violent attack. He wanted to break through Lu Ming's true essence claw. Unfortunately, it did not move at all. Get down here. Let's go! Lu Ming shouted. He pulled the elder down from the air and smashed him on the ground. Boom! The ground shook and the elder screamed in pain. His protective true vitality was shattered by Lu Ming's attack. His bones were cracking and many of them were broken. He lay there screaming like a dead dog. The surrounding onlookers, including the other people of the law enforcement hall, were all dumbfounded and looked at this scene in disbelief. Especially those onlookers, they were swallowing their saliva like crazy. This law enforcement hall's commander was too awesome. First of all, his battle prowess had exceeded everyone's expectations. An old monster with a perfect spirit embryo realm was dragged down from the air with a single move and smashed into the ground, half dead. This kind of battle prowess could be said to be astonishing. Secondly, this commander was too bold. Not only did he cripple Huang Ku, but he also beat up an elder of the Huang family. He would definitely face the anger of a spirit god expert next. Evil creature, you're looking for death. Sure enough, the spirit god expert from the Huang family was furious. He roared and a terrifying aura burst out. A pressure as deep as the ocean filled the entire area. Many people's expressions changed drastically and they retreated. The pressure formed by a spirit god expert was too strong and absolutely terrifying. Die! The spiritual god of the Huang family shouted and pointed out a finger. Wherever the finger passed, a yellow light burst out, twisting the space like a wave and finally tearing it apart. Whoosh! A terrifying finger force was pointed at Lu Ming's glabella. This overpowered commander is finished. Such a thought flashed through everyone's mind. Boom! Just as this sentence flashed across everyone's minds, Lu Ming threw a punch at the sky. A fist ray soared into the sky and collided with the finger force. With a huge boom, the finger force and the fist ray disappeared at the same time. What? He blocked the spiritual god's attack. Cries of disbelief came from all around. Lu Ming's combat strength had once again exceeded everyone's expectations. He had actually blocked the spiritual god's attack. The eyes of the law enforcement hall's commander flickered. He was extremely surprised. As far as he knew, Ming Lu was sent to the law enforcement army by the 8th Prince because he had offended the 8th Prince. He had received news that this man's combat strength was only slightly stronger than the 8th Prince's. He had recklessly injured the 8th Prince when they were sparring, so no matter how strong he was, there was a limit to his combat strength. He did not expect that he could actually block the attack of the spirit god. It seems like this person has been hiding his strength. The commander-in-chief of the law enforcement army thought to himself. A murderous glint flashed in Lu Ming's eyes. His gaze was like two dazzling spears of light that pierced towards the Huang family elder. He said coldly, "It seems like you want to be like him." The him that Lu Ming was referring to was the old man with a perfected spirit embryo. At this moment, the spiritual god of the Huang family could not help but feel nervous. At this moment, he could actually feel a terrifying pressure from Lu Ming. It was as if he was facing a terrifying beast that could tear him into pieces if it went crazy. This feeling made him panic. "What do you want?" The spiritual god of the Huang family said with an ugly expression. "Apologize in public and admit your mistakes." Lu Ming said. "Don't even think about it. Don't go too far. If you let him go now, I won't pursue the matter." The spiritual god of the Huang family's face turned ugly, but he had already given in by saying so. Lu Ming sneered. "This man killed the shopkeeper for no reason. I'm the commander of the law enforcement army and I enforce the law on behalf of the sacred emperor. How dare you come to the law enforcement hall? Do you have no respect for the ancient Saint dynasty, the royal family, and the Xie family? Do you want to overturn the heavens? And you, as the commander of the law enforcement hall, not only did you not enforce the law impartially, but you also helped the other party to bully the law enforcement hall. It seems that you don't put the imperial family in your eyes at all." Lu Ming's every word struck the heart. The Huang family's spirit god and the commander of the law enforcement hall had a drastic change in their expressions. Lu Ming was pulling the wool over their eyes and giving them a big hat. However, this was too heavy a burden for them to bear. There were so many people here today. If Lu Ming's words were to reach the ears of the imperial family or even the sage emperor, they would definitely not be able to bear the consequences. Although the law enforcement hall existed in name only and no one really took it to heart, in essence, the law enforcement hall was still the law enforcement hall. Before the law enforcement army was disbanded, its significance was the same as it was 30,000 years ago, and it had the power to enforce the law in the world. In fact, the other people of the law enforcement hall could also put such a label on others, because once this matter was blown up, the imperial family would definitely intervene. However, the prerequisite was that one had to be strong. Take Lu Ming for example. If he was not powerful enough, he would be killed by the Huang family's expert with one slap. He would not even have the chance to pin the blame on him. However, it was different now. Since Lu Ming had already spoken and pinned the blame on them, if they continued to attack, they would have proven Lu Ming's words of not taking the royal family and the Xie family seriously. In the future, the royal family and the Xie family would definitely take action. Otherwise, where would he put his face? Damn it. The spirit god of the Huang family and the commander-in-chief of the law enforcement army gritted their teeth, but they were helpless. All right, this matter is my Huang family's fault. I apologize. In the future, I will definitely warn the disciples of the Huang family to follow the rules of the law enforcement army. The Huang family's spiritual god had no choice but to apologize. Then, he looked at Huang Ku and asked him to apologize. Huang Ku was extremely unwilling, but in the end, she could only apologize. Chapter 1102. 1102 World-Shaking News. Get lost. Lu Ming picked up Huang Ku and threw her to the Huang family's spiritual god as if he was throwing garbage. The Huang family's spirit god's expression was extremely cold. He stretched out his hand and grabbed the old man with a perfect spirit embryo, leaving without looking back. Today, the Huang family had completely lost face. The commander of the law enforcement army snorted and left. The surrounding people looked at each other in disbelief. They had originally thought that this commander would be dead for sure since the Huang family had launched a large-scale attack. However, they didn't expect that even though the experts of the Huang family had come, they had returned with dejected faces. As for this commander, he hadn't even suffered a single injury. This was beyond everyone's expectations. This commander of the law enforcement army is really awesome. He's really awesome. He's the most awesome law enforcement army commander I've ever seen. The crowd was in a heated discussion. The people from the law enforcement army were also at a loss for words. They didn't expect the final result to be like this. But it felt great. The eyes of the 80 or 90 law enforcement soldiers lit up. They felt extremely comfortable. As for Lu Ming, he was full of admiration. The mighty commander. Tai Xing roared. All right, cut the crap and get to work. Lu Ming waved his hands and went back to his room. The crowd dispersed, but the news of an impressive commander in the law enforcement army spread like a whirlwind. It gave everyone another topic to talk about besides cultivating. Time passed day by day. In the blink of an eye, Lu Ming had been in the law enforcement army for half a month. In the past half a month, other than cultivating, Lu Ming had been strolling around the holy city. Of course, he wasn't really wandering around. He was just loitering outside the palace to see if he could find an opportunity to slip in. In the end, he had no choice but to give up. There were too many terrifying existences in the imperial palace. He had once sensed carefully and discovered that there were many terrifying existences in the imperial palace that could easily kill him. There were even some auras that were extremely terrifying, just like the aura of the Supreme Being. They were definitely at the Supreme Being level. Lu Ming could sense more than 10 auras like this. This was what Lu Ming sensed. There must be something that he did not sense. Even though the ancient Saint dynasty was weak, a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. The ancient Saint dynasty was still the most powerful overlord force in the central continent. This was normal. If they weren't strong, they would have been destroyed by the other overlord forces. Many overlord forces were eyeing them covetously. In the past half a month, more and more people had come to the sacred city. The million-year national sacrifice of the ancient Saint dynasty was getting closer and closer. However, due to the incident with the Huang family, some small forces would not be too presumptuous. In the area under Lu Ming's jurisdiction, there were no major events. On this day, a shocking piece of news spread in the sacred city. The sage emperor intended to choose a husband for one of the princesses in this 1 million-year national sacrifice, and he wanted to choose one of the heroes of the younger generation. The news was like an earthquake, shaking the sacred city and shocking countless people. The current sage emperor had a total of 16 children. There were 13 princes and only 3 princesses. However, the 13 princes were completely suppressed by the 3 princesses. This was because 2 of the 3 princesses were famous throughout the world. They were simply too outstanding. Xian Yanjuan, one of the 5 young tycoons of Central Continent, was also one of the 5 great beauties of Central Continent. There was also a princess named Xian Yanli. She was also one of the 5 beauties of the central continent. Although her martial arts talent was slightly inferior to Xian Yanjuan's, she was also a second-grade heaven's favorite. She was as famous as goddess Tan Xiang. These 2 princesses were simply too outstanding, making countless people envious. It was said that there was also a princess who was the youngest of all the princes and princesses. She was also peerless in her beauty and temperament. She was not inferior to the other 2 princesses at all. Even her martial arts talent was shocking, but not many people had seen her before. That was because the princess was an anomaly in the royal Xie family. The word variant was a taboo word in the royal Xie family. The royal Xie family had declined because of a variant. Which princess was he looking for? Everyone was extremely curious. However, no matter which princess it was, many young geniuses from the major forces were tempted. After that, all the major forces sent people to investigate and verify the authenticity of the news. Lu Ming was shocked when he heard this piece of news. Who was the one choosing a husband for the princess? Lu Ming was filled with worry. He was afraid that it was Xian Yanqing. 3 days later, even more shocking news spread. The current sage emperor had personally spoken, ordering people to spread the news. It was true that he was choosing a husband for a princess. This princess was Xian Yanlin. On top of that, there would be a competition between the young geniuses on the day of the million-year national sacrifice. The winner would become Xian Yanlin's husband and enter the ancient Saint Emperor's palace to cultivate. The second and third place winners would be able to propose a condition to the sage emperor, which the sage emperor would try his best to fulfill. At the same time, they would be able to enter the ancient hall for comprehension. As for those ranked 4th to 10th, they would be able to enter the ancient Saint Emperor's hall to cultivate. Once the news was out, the sacred city was shaken and countless people were shocked. At the same time, the news spread like a whirlwind to the central continent and even the 4 other territories. Countless young heaven's favorites were shocked and revealed a fiery glow. There were some geniuses who were not interested in first place and being able to marry a princess. They were interested in one of the conditions the Saint Emperor had set for them, which was to enter the Saint Emperor's ancient palace to cultivate. The sage emperor was an emperor, so there was no need to mention the value of his condition. The Saint Emperor's ancient palace was a holy land for cultivation. It was said that the ancient Saint dynasty's Saint Emperors' comprehensions were contained within. If one could comprehend them and gain something, it would be extremely useful for breaking through to the emperor level. The Xie clan of the ancient Saint dynasty had a legacy that had lasted for millions of years. They had produced many emperors throughout the generations, and this was why they had remained so powerful. Some people said that this had something to do with the ancient Saint Emperor Palace. This made the heavens' favorites who were interested in the emperor's path extremely excited. After confirming the news, they all rushed to the sacred city. Lu Ming heaved a huge sigh of relief when he heard that. That princess was not Xian Yanqing. But at the same time, Lu Ming was extremely tempted. He wasn't interested in Xian Yanlin, nor was he interested in entering the Saint Emperor's ancient hall. He was interested in one of the Saint Emperor's conditions. If he could get 2nd or 3rd place, he would be able to make a request to the sage emperor to let Xian Yanqing go. At the thought of this, Lu Ming had already decided to participate in the competition. This news caused chaos in the ancient Saint dynasty and became the top topic of discussion. This news was discussed every day. Many people were also secretly guessing why the sage emperor would do this. However, it wasn't hard for those with foresight to guess that the royal family and the Xie family wanted to use this method to strengthen the royal family's strength. The Heaven's Pride expert who could get 1st place and marry Princess Xian Yanlin must be from a powerful force. This way, the imperial family's strength would be increased through marriage. At the same time, by opening up the Saint Emperor Ancient Palace, they could also befriend those geniuses and the overlords. This was something that they had no choice but to do. From this, one could see how weak the Xie clan of the ancient Saint dynasty was. Chapter 1103. 1103 The Chaotic Heaven's Divine Warrior. In the hustle and bustle, time passed day by day. The sacred city was even more lively, and there were more and more people. However, Lu Ming's days did not change. Other than cultivating, he would bring his people to stroll around the holy city. This mansion is so strange. It's covered in dust, but it's sealed by a large array of inscriptions. In the northeast of the holy city, Lu Ming led his group for a stroll and came to a huge mansion. This mansion was very old and majestic. It occupied a large area, but it was obviously uninhabited and sealed by a large formation. This was rare in the holy city. Lord, lower your voice. This mansion is a taboo. On the side, Sun Lin's face was solemn as he whispered, as if it was a taboo. Forbidden? I'm curious, tell me about it. Lu Ming asked curiously. This? Sun Lin hesitated and stammered. Speak. Lu Ming's face darkened. All right, Commander, I'll tell you through voice transmission. This is because this mansion is the mansion of the chaotic heaven's divine warrior, Ciel Wan. Sun Lin sent a voice transmission to Lu Ming. Ciel Wan, the divine warrior of the chaotic heavens? The chaotic heavens divine warrior who caused the chaos in the ancient Saint dynasty 30,000 years ago? Lu Ming was shocked. That's right, it's the chaotic heavens divine warrior's mansion. Sun Lin said. Oh, Sun Lin, you seem to know a lot about the chaotic heavens divine emperor. Then do you know why he betrayed the imperial family and the Xie clan? Lu Ming asked. Yes. Lord Commander, I've also read about it in an ancient book by chance. It said that Ciel Wan, the chaotic heavens divine warrior, is an anomaly in the Xie family. The royal Xie family has a noble bloodline, and the bloodline that they awaken is pure and holy. However, there is a very small chance that someone will awaken a bloodline that is completely different from others. It's the complete opposite, an extremely dark bloodline. Such a person is called an anomaly by the royal Xie family and will be looked down upon and ridiculed. When the chaotic sky sovereign was young, he grew up in all kinds of mockery and bullying, so he was filled with hatred towards the royal Xie family. However, the chaotic sky sovereign's talent was terrifyingly strong. The more bloodlines he awakened, the more terrifying his talent became. He was simply unparalleled in the world, so he was later valued by the royal Xie family and entrusted with an important task. After that, the chaotic heavens divine warrior even broke through to the divine realm. His combat strength was extremely terrifying, and he was able to suppress the other divine warriors. At that time, the chaotic heavens divine warrior finally erupted. He led his subordinates and started a rebellion. They fought the royal family and the Xie family until the heavens and earth fell. Although the chaotic heavens divine warrior was suppressed in the end, the ancient Saint dynasty suffered great losses in that battle. Countless spirit gods and supreme beings died, and even many divine warriors died. From then on, their strength was greatly weakened, and the other forces took the opportunity to split up, to form the current situation. Sun Lin told Lu Ming about the records he had read. Lu Ming was deep in thought. The experience of the chaotic heavens divine warrior was so similar to that of Xian Yanqing. The bloodline that he awakened was called an anomaly by the royal Xie family. It was just a bloodline, yet he treated it like this. It was simply ridiculous. Ciel Wan, the sovereign of the chaotic heavens, had unparalleled talent. If no one had laughed at him or humiliated him when he was young, why would he have rebelled after he had become powerful? If not for the betrayal, the Xie family of the ancient Saint dynasty would not have ended up where they were today. I've heard that the current 16th princess has also awakened a mutated bloodline. Sigh, what a pity. The other members of the royal family have always looked down on mutated bloodlines. After the incident with the chaotic sky emperor, the fate of those with mutated bloodlines has become even worse. Before the appearance of the chaotic heavens divine warrior, if any of the royal family's variant bloodlines revealed their supreme talent, the royal family would still nurture them, just like the chaotic heavens divine warrior. However, after the chaotic heavens divine warrior appeared, any of the variant bloodlines would be directly suppressed. The stronger the talent, the more they would have to suppress it. It's simply a taboo, because they're afraid that another figure like the chaotic heaven's divine warrior would appear. Sun Lin continued. Gotcha. Lu Ming could not help but clench his fists. No matter what, he had to save Xian Yanqing. No matter how difficult it was, he had to go through it. Thereafter, Lu Ming left the place and did not ask further. Time passed, and soon, there was still half a month to go before the million-year national sacrifice. After this period of cultivation, Lu Ming's cultivation had also progressed and he had reached the middle stage of the second level of the spiritual god realm. It's too slow. It's too slow to rely on absorbing spiritual energy to improve cultivation. Lu Ming sighed. However, he had no choice. He did not have many raw gemstones on him. The amount of raw gemstones he needed to increase his cultivation in the spiritual god realm was simply terrifying. However, the will of heaven and earth and the will of water had broken through and reached the fourth level lower tier. Now, only the will of earth had not broken through to the fourth level lower tier. On this day, Lu Ming had just ended his cultivation and was about to go out for a walk when someone came to inform him that something had happened. Someone had killed someone on the street and the battle was still ongoing. Who is it? Lu Ming asked. I heard that he's a disciple of the heavenly martial sword faction. Tai Xing replied with an ugly expression. The heavenly martial sword faction was an overlord force, and an extremely powerful one at that. What should he do now? They knew that as the various overlords gathered in the sacred city, something would happen. What do we do? Of course, we'll handle it fairly. Lu Ming said. Fair and just? Commander, the other party is the heavenly martial sword school. Tai Xing called out worriedly. What's wrong with the heavenly martial sword sect? Don't forget, this is the holy city, not the heavenly martial sword faction. You guys follow me. Lu Ming shouted coldly and strode out. The others had no choice but to follow. They stepped on the air and flew, and soon arrived at the scene of the incident, outside a restaurant. At this moment, the restaurant was already surrounded by people. Lu Ming appeared in the sky and looked down. On the street, there were two people lying on the ground, blood flowing all over the ground. Their throats had been slit by a sword, and they had long since stopped breathing. On the other side of the two corpses, the battle was still going on. 3 white-robed disciples of the heavenly martial sword faction were attacking 3 people. An old man and 2 young men and women. However, these 3 people were no match for the 3 disciples of the heavenly martial sword faction. The 3 Sky Martial Sword faction disciples were all 5th-level Spirit Embryo Realm experts. They were very young and belonged to the younger generation. To have such a cultivation at this age, he was obviously one of the top geniuses of the Heavenly Martial Sword sect. As for the old man and the 2 young ones, the old man's cultivation was at the 7th level of the Spirit Embryo Realm, but the young man and woman's cultivation was only at the 1st or 2nd level of the Spirit Embryo Realm. The difference was too great. Although the old man's cultivation was profound, the 3 disciples of the Heavenly Martial Sword faction were all top-notch Heaven's Pride experts. It was common for them to fight above their level. They completely suppressed the old man and didn't have the power to fight back. Hee, you're really looking for death. How dare you talk about the Heavenly Martial Sword sect behind our backs? One of the disciples of the Heavenly Martial Sword faction sneered. Your Heavenly Martial Sword sect is too overbearing. You don't even allow others to chat? Wu Chengkong and the others were killed by Lu Shaoqing in the secret realm of the Saint Mansion of the Tianxia Academy. It's a fact that the whole world knows. Are you going to kill everyone in the world? The young woman said stubbornly. Chapter 1104. 1104 directly suppressed. Lu Ming's eyes flickered. From the simple conversation between the two of them, it was not difficult to guess what had happened. It must be the young woman and the others talking about what had happened in the Tianxia Academy and the secret realm of the Saint Mansion. In the secret realm of the Saint Mansion, the 2 strongest Heaven's favorites of the previous generation of the Heavenly Martial Sword sect were killed by Lu Ming. The 2 strongest Heaven's favorites of this generation were also killed by Lu Ming. They were lucky to survive because of the life talisman. This matter had already spread far and wide, and Lu Shaoqing's name had shaken the entire central continent. The young woman must have been talking about this matter, and if the disciples of the heavenly martial sword sect heard it, they would naturally take action. Shut up. How dare you bring this up again? Who knows what kind of despicable methods Lu Shaoqing used to harm the senior brothers of the heavenly martial sword sect? How dare you all spout nonsense here? You're courting death. Kill. A few disciples of the heavenly martial sword faction shouted, and their attacks became even more violent. Stop. The law enforcement army is here. Lu Ming stepped on the air and shouted. The three disciples of the Sky Martial Sword faction turned to look at Lu Ming, their eyes full of contempt. The Heavenly Martial Sword sect is handling matters. Unrelated people, get lost. A disciple of the Heavenly Martial Sword faction shouted coldly. He was extremely domineering. They didn't even care about the law enforcement army. It's that awesome commander of the law enforcement army. Does he dare to touch the disciples of the Heavenly Sword faction? That's impossible. No matter how powerful he is, he might be able to deal with a small force like the Huang family. However, this is the Heavenly Martial Sword faction, a top overlord force. Unless he has a death wish, he would never dare to touch a disciple of the Heavenly Martial Sword faction. That's right. Didn't you see that the disciples of the Heavenly Sword faction didn't even care about him? At that moment, many people in the crowd recognized Lu Ming. However, no one thought that he would dare to touch the disciples of the Heaven Martial Sword faction. A small law enforcement army dared to touch a disciple of the Heavenly Sword faction? Wasn't that looking for death? Kill. The three Heaven Martial Sword faction disciples ignored Lu Ming and attacked more and more fiercely. Their sword chi was like a rainbow, and the 7th level Spirit Embryo Realm Elder was at a complete disadvantage. He couldn't resist at all, and his chest was slashed by a sword light. A deep sword mark appeared, almost splitting him in half, and blood flowed out. Young lady, young master, leave quickly. The old man roared and exploded with all his might, trying to get the young man and woman to leave. Leave? Today, none of you will be able to leave. If you dare to spread rumors about my heavenly sword sect, you will all be killed. A disciple of the Heavenly Martial Sword faction shouted coldly. His figure flashed, and like a sword light, he bypassed the old man and attacked the young woman. No! The old man roared, but he couldn't even save himself, so how could he help? The young woman's face was as white as snow. She was only at the 1st level of the Spirit Embryo Realm, while the other party was at the 5th level of the Spirit Embryo Realm. In addition, he was a Heaven's favorite with powerful combat strength. She couldn't block him at all. Die! The disciple of the Heavenly Martial Sword faction had a ferocious look in his eyes. His sword light was like lightning as it slashed towards the young woman. However, the sword light stopped halfway. Because the wrist of the person holding the sword was caught, the sword of the Heavenly Martial Sword School disciple could no longer cut down. The person who grabbed his wrist was naturally Lu Ming. At the critical moment, Lu Ming appeared in front of the young woman and blocked the sword of the disciple of the Sky Martial Sword School. When he saw that it was Lu Ming, the disciple's eyes were filled with murderous intent. He shouted, "How dare you, a mere law enforcement soldier, interfere with my attack? I'll kill you as well." With a burst of vital essence, the sword chi from the disciple of the Heavenly Martial Sword faction whistled. He pointed his fingers at Lu Ming's throat like a sword. Bang! Lu Ming kicked the disciple's stomach. The disciple screamed and his body flew dozens of meters away. He fell heavily on the ground. You dare to fight back? The disciple of the Sky Martial Sword faction shouted in disbelief. Lu Ming actually dared to hit him? He was a disciple of the Heavenly Martial Sword faction. Idiot! Lu Ming said faintly. This person wanted to kill him just now. Wasn't it normal for him to retaliate? Could it be that this disciple of the Heavenly Martial Sword faction was so superior that no one would dare to fight back when he killed them? Was his head kicked by a donkey? At this moment, The other two disciples of the Heaven Martial Sword faction stopped their attacks and looked at Lu Ming in a daze. A mere law enforcement army, an ant-like thing, actually dared to beat up a disciple of the Heavenly Martial Sword faction? They had yet to recover from their shock. The surrounding onlookers were also dumbfounded. After a long time, someone finally reacted. Whoa, this awesome commander is really awesome. He even dared to beat up the disciples of the Heavenly Sword faction. That's right. This is beyond my expectations. He's too bold. He's bold, but he's brainless. How should he deal with the aftermath? Lu Ming's action caused a wave of discussion as it really shocked everyone. Previously, no one had thought that Lu Ming would dare to make a move. However, the truth was beyond their expectations. Brat, you're looking for death. At this moment, the other two disciples of the Sky Martial Sword faction finally reacted. One of them shouted and became one with his sword, turning into a sharp sword light and charging toward Lu Ming, trying to kill him with one strike. Bang! However, he was met with Lu Ming's kick. This kick was the same as the previous one. It landed on his stomach. Fast, accurate, and ruthless, the disciple let out a blood-curdling scream and was sent flying far away. He fell beside the previous disciple and also fell flat on his face. The two of them were in the same position. The crowd gasped. Lu Ming was really audacious. If he had accidentally hit the disciple of the Heaven Martial Sword faction just now, it was completely intentional. He was not afraid of the disciple at all. In the crowd, the law enforcement soldiers who came with Lu Ming broke out in cold sweat. They had caused a huge mess. They sighed in their hearts. The remaining disciple of the Sky Martial Sword faction was shocked. Lu Ming's combat strength was too terrifying. With just a simple move, he had killed a fellow disciple who had a similar combat strength to him. He did not dare to make a move at all. Kid, how dare you hit the Heaven's favorite of the Heavenly Sword faction? You're dead. Not only you, but the force behind you and your family are all dead. They'll all be annihilated. Just you wait. You're just a mere law enforcement army, you lowly thing. Just you wait. The remaining disciple of the Heavenly Martial Sword faction shouted ferociously, then turned around and wanted to leave. Did I let you go? Lu Ming said calmly. The disciple of the Sky Martial Sword faction froze. He looked at Lu Ming and said, "What do you mean by that?" He was about to leave and Lu Ming still wanted to pursue the matter. Nonsense, you want to just walk away after killing someone in my territory? Who do you think I am? What's the law enforcement army? Lu Ming shouted and stepped forward. Don't come over. I'm telling you, you're dead. The remaining disciples of the Sky Martial Sword faction shouted. However, when they saw Lu Ming approaching them, they were so frightened that they trembled all over and could not even speak properly. Who? Lu Ming kicked him directly. Myriad Paths of the Dragon Emperor. Chapter 1105. 1105. If Lu Shaoqing can do it, so can I. This kick was as fast as lightning. Before the other party could react, Lu Ming had already kicked him in the stomach. He flew out screaming and lined up with the other two people before him. He lay there looking like a dog eating shit. Ah, you bastard! You're dead. The elder of the Heavenly Sword faction and Wu Qingkong and Wu Zong are here. They're not far away. The news will spread soon. You're dead. One of the disciples of the Sky Martial Sword faction shouted and threatened Lu Ming. Bang! Lu Ming strode over and left a footprint on his face, causing his face to rub against the ground. Wu Qingkong and Wu Zong? They were killed by Lu Shaoqing in the secret realm of the Saint Mansion. If not for the Destiny Talisman, they would have died long ago. I'll wait here for these two pieces of trash to come. If Lu Shaoqing can kill them, I can kill them too. Lu Ming lowered his head and looked down at the three disciples of the Sky Martial Sword faction. His cold voice spread throughout the entire area. Everyone was stunned. This commander was too awesome. He was actually waiting for Wu Qingkong and Wu Zong to kill the elites like Lu Shaoqing. Lu Shaoqing was a peerless heaven's favorite, an existence comparable to the five magnates. How could you, the law enforcement army, compare to him? However, he had to admire Lu Ming's courage. Lu Ming stepped on the face of the disciple of the Sky Martial Sword faction and waited. The other two disciples of the Sky Martial Sword faction lay there, not daring to say a word for fear of being trampled on. However, they hated Lu Ming to the core and wished they could tear him into pieces. Tai Xing and the others broke out in cold sweat. Tai Xing quietly walked to Lu Ming's side and said, "Commander, wasn't this too much? What if the experts from the Sky Martial Sword faction come? What are you afraid of? We're from the Law Enforcement Hall, and we enforce the law on behalf of the Sage Emperor. What's there to be afraid of?" Lu Ming said casually. Tai Xing and the rest were speechless. They could only brace themselves ears and wait with Lu Ming. What happened here also spread like a whirlwind. What? There was such a thing? There's such an awesome commander, let's go and take a look. When many people heard the news, they didn't believe it at first. Then, they were extremely curious and wanted to go and see. Many disciples and geniuses of the Overlord forces were shocked when they heard the news. In the past few years, the power of the royal family had been deteriorating, and the law enforcement army was like an empty name. The geniuses and disciples of the Overlord forces could do whatever they wanted in the Holy City. The law enforcement army did not dare to control them and tried to curry favor with them. Now, someone actually dared to beat up the Heaven's Martial Sword School's prodigy. This piqued the curiosity of many people, and they all rushed over to watch. In the 8th prince's residence, Xie Zhen was drinking tea in the courtyard when Shi Jing rushed in. "Guard Shi, what's the rush?" Xie Zhen asked. "8th prince, it's about that Ming Lu." Shi Jing said. "Oh, that blind guy, is he dead? Even if he didn't die, he wouldn't be able to live on. You dare to injure this prince, you really don't have eyes, you dog." Xie Zhen took a sip of tea and slowly said, "He's not dead. That guy is really audacious. Huang Ku from the Huang family killed someone some time ago, and he actually crippled Huang Ku's cultivation." Shi Jing answered. He destroyed Huang Ku's cultivation? The Huang family didn't come to kill that Ming Lu?" Xie Zhen asked curiously. "Of course they went. A spirit god expert, an old monster with a perfect spirit embryo, and even the commander of the law enforcement army." Shi Jing said. "Oh, in that case, is Ming Lu still alive?" Xie Zhen was a little curious. In his opinion, in such a situation, Ming Lu should have been killed by the Huang family's spiritual god. No, that Ming Lu's combat strength is astonishing. He was actually able to block the spiritual god's attack and even used the carelessness of a saint emperor. Shi Jing briefly explained what happened last time. "Damn it, this Ming Lu actually has such a cultivation, and he even used the name of my imperial family. He's lucky to have escaped this disaster." After Xie Zhen heard this, his expression turned ugly and he was very unhappy. "You just rushed here and said it was because of Ming Lu. What happened to him?" He's dead for sure this time. He actually beat up a disciple of the Heavenly Martial Sword faction." Shi Jing told him about how Lu Ming had injured the disciples of the Heavenly Sword faction and how he was now waiting for the experts of the faction. "This Ming Lu is really bold. Let's see how he dies this time. Let's go, we can't miss such a good show. Let's go and take a look." Xie Zhen got up excitedly and rushed over with Shi Jing. In the northeast of the sacred city, in front of the restaurant, Lu Ming was stepping on the face of a disciple of the Heavenly Martial Sword faction, waiting quietly. In the sky, more and more people came, filling the sky. "Wu Tsang is here." A loud cry rang out, shaking the entire place. In one direction, many people opened up a path. In the sky over there, two figures stepped through the air. One of them was the second-grade heaven's favorite of the Heavenly Sword faction, Wu Tsang. Shi Fang was following behind Wu Tsang. Lu Ming was slightly stunned. Then he realized that Shi Fang must have informed Wu Tsang. In fact, it was true. The moment Shi Fang heard that Lu Ming had injured a disciple of the Heavenly Sword faction, he knew that his chance had come. He had always wanted to befriend a heaven's favorite like Wu Tsang, but he never had the chance. Now, the chance to please him had come. Without hesitation, he rushed to Wu Song's residence and passed on the news to him. As expected, Wu Song was furious and came to kill him. Wu Song walked very slowly, one step at a time. With every step he took, the sky buzzed and shook as if it couldn't withstand Wu Song's anger. Wu Song's eyes were filled with killing intent and his voice was cold. Bastards of the law enforcement hall, how dare you injure the disciples of the heavenly martial sword faction? Good, very good. You're alone? What about Wu Chenko? I heard that you and your senior brother were beaten up by Lu Shaoqing. I'm going to learn from Lu Shaoqing and beat you up. It's a pity that you're the only one. Lu Ming cast a casual glance at Wu Song and said indifferently. The crowd was stunned. This commander was too awesome, right? Was Wu Song not enough? He wanted to learn from Lu Shaoqing and beat up Wu Qingkong and Wu Song? Who did he think he was? Wu Song was a second-class world and was famous all over the world. His cultivation had already reached the spiritual god realm. Such a heaven's pride expert's combat strength was not something that ordinary spiritual god realm powerhouses could compare to. Back then, Lu Ming was able to block a move from the Huang family's spiritual god. Did he really think that he could compete with such a heaven's pride expert? He was too naive. Many people shook their heads, thinking that this overpowered commander would die today. Tai Xing and the rest had ugly expressions on their faces. They did not dare to say a word and could only stand behind Lu Ming with gritted teeth. He had no choice. In such a situation, he could only hold on. Hee, then I'll see how you're going to beat him up. Wu Song laughed out of anger and stepped forward. Boom! Heaven and earth trembled, and the sword power was vast. The sword chi stirred the wind and clouds. A terrible light was emitted from Wu Song's body. Every light was like a sword chi. The sword chi was endless. Chapter 1106. 1106 Chapter 1106 Suppressing Wu Song. Those who had never seen a second-grade heaven's favorite in action were shocked. Was this what a second-grade heaven's favorite was? The power was too terrifying. Many people retreated in a frenzy, afraid of being touched by Wu Song's sword. A heaven's pride expert like him could kill experts of the same level with his sword's sharpness alone. This commander is dead for sure. Seeing Wu Song's power, many people sighed. Wu Song was so powerful. What could Lu Ming use to block him? Die! Wu Song shouted coldly. His palm was like a sword. Light burst forth and formed a dazzling sword ray that slashed toward Lu Ming. As the sword radiance slashed, even the space was torn apart, revealing a terrifying, pitch-black spatial rift. Not good, quickly dodge. Behind Lu Ming, Tai Xing and the rest were terrified. Faced with such a powerful sword, they felt that it was impossible to resist. If they resisted, they would only die. They shouted and wanted to retreat, but they found that their bodies were covered by a terrifying sword power and they couldn't move. It's over, it's over. I've finally been killed by this unreliable commander. A thought flashed through the minds of Tai Xing and the others. However, at this moment, they saw a long spear condensed in Lu Ming's hands. The long spear shook and hummed. Even the space trembled. At this moment, Tai Xing and the others realized that the sword power that enveloped them had disappeared. They had regained their freedom. Buzz! Then, they saw Lu Ming holding a long spear and sweeping it out. This spear was like a long spear sweeping across the surface of water. This was because wherever the long spear passed, layers of ripples would appear in the space. Moreover, these ripples would all gather on the long spear. Bang! The long spear and the sword radiance collided. Only a soft sound was heard before Wu Song's sword radiance was destroyed. He blocked it. Tai Xing and the others were stunned. The surrounding onlookers were also stunned. This awesome commander could actually block Wu Song's move. When did a commander of the law enforcement army become so powerful? A bunch of questions flashed through everyone's mind. Wu Song was also stunned. Apparently, he did not expect that a law enforcement soldier could block his attack. Although he did not use his full strength, he still felt embarrassed. Who was he? A second-grade heavens favorite whose name shook the central continent, an existence second only to the top 5 young men, couldn't take down a mere commander of the law enforcement army with one move. This made him burst out with even stronger and burning killing intent. Good, very good. You do have some ability. But today, your end is already decided. Wu Tsang shouted coldly. The sword chi around his body became even hotter. Vital essence gushed out continuously and finally turned into a sword chi that was several times more terrifying than before. It slashed toward Lu Ming. However, Lu Ming still swept out his spear casually and destroyed Wu Tsang's sword aura, turning it into nothing. Show me your true ability, or it won't be enough. Lu Ming looked at Wu Tsang from the corner of his eyes. Damn it. Wu Tsang shouted and unsheathed his sword. The sword radiance was so bright that it seemed like it was going to split the heaven and earth. Kill! Wu Tsang wielded his combat sword with terrifying might. As he slashed out with his combat sword, the space around him shattered. Heavens, he's too strong. Wu Tsang is furious. He's too terrifying. Retreat! Retreat! Many people shouted and retreated madly again. Who? Lu Ming held the spear in one hand. The long spear in his hand slashed violently and turned into 1,000 meters long. It swept out in a brutal manner. With a bang, Wu Tsang's sword aura was shattered again. However, this time, Lu Ming did not stop. The terrifying giant spear continued to press down on Wu Tsang. Impossible! Impossible! Wu Tsang shouted in disbelief. He had already performed a divine-level martial arts technique, but he was still defeated by Lu Ming's spear. How was this possible? He could not believe it. What he could not stand the most was that he felt a strong sense of danger when Lu Ming swept his spear at him. How could a mere law enforcement army, which was as insignificant as an ant, have such a powerful expert? Burst, burst. He roared in his heart and activated his divine bloodline. He merged his bloodline and turned it into a sword with shocking sword chi. Suppress! Lu Ming stepped into the air. His long spear contained the power of the prison-suppressing heaven technique. He changed the momentum of the spear and smashed it down at Wu Tsang. Clang! The long spear hit the combat sword that Wu Tsang had transformed into. The attack launched by the combat sword was instantly destroyed. The combat sword shook violently and finally exploded with a bang. The combat sword exploded, revealing Wu Tsang's body. His face was pale and he spat out a mouthful of blood. His eyes were filled with disbelief. Everyone in the surroundings looked at this scene in disbelief. Wu Tsang was defeated. Wu Tsang was actually defeated by Lu Ming's spear. How was this possible? What was going on? Was he still a commander of the law enforcement army? How could he be so powerful? Those who had thought that Lu Ming was dead for sure almost bit off their tongues and glared at him until their eyes burst. It was too unbelievable. As for Shifeng, he thought he was dreaming. Wasn't Minglu only at the 7th level of the spirit embryo realm? Wasn't he just a disciple of the Black Spear sect? How could he be so strong? His body trembled in disbelief. As for Tai Xing and the others, they were completely petrified. The 3 disciples of the heavenly martial sword faction were also petrified, staring at the sky in a daze. How weak! I was wondering how strong a second-grade heaven's favorite of the heavenly sword faction would be. Lu Ming pursed his lips, his face full of disdain. Wu Tsang was furious. He was so furious that he wanted to roar at the sky. In the past, he was terrifyingly talented and powerful. In the heavenly sword faction, only Wu Qingkong could beat him. Even in the battle of karmic luck, he had not lost too badly. But recently, he was first killed by Lu Shaoqing in the secret realm of the Saint Mansion. If not for the life talisman, he would not have been able to keep his life. Now, he was actually defeated by a mere commander of the law enforcement army. This was a great humiliation. From now on, his name, Wu Tsang, would become a laughingstock and his reputation would be greatly reduced. How could he not be angry and hate her? If he knew that Lu Shaoqing and the commander of the law enforcement army were the same person, what would he think? Bastard, just you wait. You're dead. Wu Song roared and retreated. Since you're here, where do you want to go? Have a good rest with your junior brothers. Lu Ming took a step forward. His body was like a stream of light and he rushed in front of Wu Song in a few moments. Don't you dare! Wu Song roared. Lu Ming actually wanted to suppress him and let him lie there like the other disciples of the heavenly martial sword faction? How dare he? He was the second Heaven's Pride expert of the heavenly sword faction. He was completely different from the other Heaven's Pride experts. Suppress! Lu Ming's eyes were cold as he stepped in the air. The power of the 9 dragons' heaven stomping steps burst out. He took 7 consecutive steps toward Wu Song. Bang! 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 Wu Song's body trembled violently. He was injured and could not withstand the impact. His body shook violently and blood spurted out of his mouth. In the end, Lu Ming stepped on his face. He screamed and fell to the ground. He came into close contact with the ground and created a human-shaped pit. Chapter 1107. 1107. The Elder of the Heavenly Sword Faction takes action. Bang! Lu Ming's body fell and he stepped on Wu Song again, causing him to scream in pain. His cultivation was completely sealed by Lu Ming and he could not exert any strength. The crowd gasped. The commander of the law enforcement army was too ruthless. He even dared to suppress Wu Song. How overbearing! Lu Ming grabbed Wu Song and threw him to the side of the other 3 disciples of the Sky Martial Sword Faction. The 3 disciples of the Heavenly Martial Sword Faction looked at each other and then at Wu Song, who was standing at the side. Their expressions were very interesting. Initially, they were suppressed by Lu Ming and were lying on the ground like dogs eating shit. They felt extremely humiliated. However, when they saw Wu Song lying on the ground, they felt much better. Even a Heaven's Pride expert like Wu Song was suppressed and laid on the ground. It made sense that they were lying on the ground. Ah! Wu Song howled like a wild beast. He was so angry, especially when he saw the strange looks from the people around him. He wanted to kill himself. Of course, he was only thinking about it. How could he bear to die? He had a great future ahead of him. Where are you going? At this moment, Lu Ming's gaze was fixed on a person in the sky not far away. That person was Shifang. When he saw that even Wu Song was suppressed, he was so scared that he almost peed his pants. He was about to sneak away when Lu Ming saw him. His face revealed a smile that was uglier than crying and said, "Minglu, what are you trying to do? What do you want? You're an Imperial Dragon Guard, but you actually brought people from the Heavenly Martial Sword sect to deal with the law enforcement hall. You're a traitor, and you're colluding with foreign enemies. What do you think I'm doing?" Lu Ming sneered. His essential core exploded and he grabbed at Shifang in the air. What? Shifang was shocked. He wanted to retreat, but he felt a terrible force envelop him. He couldn't move. The next moment, a force pulled him down and he fell to the ground. "Ah, don't!" he screamed. Bang! Lu Ming lifted his leg and stomped on Shifang's dantian. Shifang arched his body like a big shrimp and let out a heart-wrenching scream. My cultivation, you've destroyed my cultivation." Shifang let out a desperate roar. The spirit embryo in his dantian was crushed by Lu Ming. "I'll cripple your cultivation as punishment. Get lost." With that, he kicked and Shifang flew out like a ball. He turned into a black dot and disappeared in the air. Lu Ming did not know how far he had flown. He could not be bothered to think about whether he would fall to his death. "All right, not a bad harvest. What are you guys doing? Bring them all back to the law enforcement hall." Lu Ming looked at Tai Xing and the rest. Bring him back to the law enforcement hall?" Tai Xing and the others looked at each other, their expressions ugly. "Of course. Only by bringing them back will we have the capital to negotiate with them. Do you think that the Heavenly Martial Sword faction will let this matter rest if you let them go? Don't just stand there, take them away." Lu Ming waved his hand and grabbed Wu Song. He stepped into the air and headed toward the law enforcement hall. Tai Xing and the rest were helpless. They could only bring the other 3 disciples of the Heavenly Martial Sword faction and follow Lu Ming. There's going to be a great show. This matter will definitely attract the elders of the Heavenly Martial Sword School. Let's go and take a look. This commander is indeed powerful. However, let's see how he's going to deal with the elder generation of the Heavenly Sword faction. Let's go and take a look. There were tens of thousands of people in the surrounding crowd. They followed Lu Ming from a distance and headed towards the law enforcement hall. Furthermore, the number of people was increasing. Not long after Lu Ming and the rest left, Xie Zhen and Shi Jing rushed over. When they heard that Wu Cang was suppressed by Lu Ming, the two of them were dumbfounded and in disbelief. Initially, they were certain that Wu Cang would beat Lu Ming to a pulp or even kill him on the spot. They did not expect that the outcome would be the complete opposite of what they had expected. To the law enforcement hall. Xie Zhen brought Shi Jing and hurried to the law enforcement hall. When Lu Ming and the rest brought Wu Cang and the rest back to the law enforcement hall, the remaining law enforcement soldiers were stunned. Then, their eyes were filled with fear. Lu Ming had actually suppressed the disciples of the Heaven Martial Sword faction and even Wu Cang. This was a huge blow to the heavens. How were they going to deal with the elders of the Heaven Martial Sword faction who would go crazy in the future? We're the law enforcement army, enforcing the law on behalf of the Sage Emperor. What are we afraid of? Follow my arrangements and get to work. Lu Ming shouted and then instructed Tai Xing and the rest. As for Lu Ming, he threw Wu Cang and the others on the ground in a row. He took out an armchair and sat there, closing his eyes to rest. The onlookers looked at each other. This commander of the law enforcement army was really bold. At this moment, he was actually so leisurely sitting on the armchair with his eyes closed. The sky above the law enforcement hall was filled with people, and as time passed, more and more people appeared. This time, it was different from the previous time. This time, it was against the Heavenly Martial Sword faction. Furthermore, a second-grade Heaven's favorite had been suppressed. This caused a huge commotion, and many people were shocked and rushed over to watch. Xie Zhen and Shi Jing had arrived. There were even second-grade Heaven's favorites from other overlord forces. Everyone saw Jing Kongling, Kong Xian, and Goddess Tan Xiang. There were also Shui Luo Zi, Yin Bupo, and so on. There were at least 7 to 8 people. The elites were shocked to see Lu Ming sitting on the armchair with his eyes closed. Wu Cang was as famous as they were, but this unassuming commander of the law enforcement army was so powerful that he could suppress Wu Cang. This shocked them. The royal family of the ancient Saint dynasty is indeed powerful. Even a commander of the law enforcement army is so powerful. Some people thought to themselves. All of a sudden, a terrifying pressure descended from the sky. Everyone felt as if a mountain was pressing down on their bodies. There was a chi activity that let out a terrifying roar. Under the pressure, the crowd took the initiative to open up a path. 3 old men stepped through the air with gloomy expressions. These 3 elders were all dressed in white robes and carried ancient swords on their backs. Their bodies seemed to be filled with endless sword chi, and just their auras were extremely shocking. It's here. Everyone's heart trembled. The elders of the Heavenly Martial Sword faction were on the move. At this moment, Lu Ming also opened his eyes and looked at the sky. The 3 powerhouses of the Heavenly Martial Sword faction flew over and finally stopped in the sky above the law enforcement hall. Bastard, you're finished. You're dead. Ha, you're dead. Wu Cang saw the arrival of the 3 old men and cried out in joy. Bang! Lu Ming got up and stomped on Wu Cang's face, causing his face to smash heavily on the ground. He took a bite of the soil and struggled madly with his limbs. He was so aggrieved that he was about to explode. The onlookers shuddered in their hearts. Lu Ming actually dared to do this in the face of 3 seniors from the Heavenly Martial Sword faction. He was simply lawless. The 3 elders' gazes were as sharp as swords as they landed on Lu Ming. How audacious! An old man shouted angrily, his eyes extremely gloomy as he rebuked, Kid, do you know who you've captured? Aren't they just a few pieces of trash from the Heavenly Martial Sword faction? Do you think it's a glorious thing to raise a few pieces of trash? Lu Ming pursed his lips and said casually. He appeared to be very calm, as if he didn't care about the elders of the Heavenly Martial Sword Sect. Chapter 1108. 1108 Extorting the Heavenly Sword Sect. Impudent. How audacious. He should be killed. The three elders of the Heavenly Sword faction shouted one after another. Their eyes were cold, and their bodies were filled with sword chi and sword power. Ha, he really brought this upon himself. This lowly thing is dead for sure. In the air, the eighth prince, Xie Zhen, sneered. Brat, you and everyone else in the law enforcement hall should commit suicide. I'll let this matter go. Otherwise, not only you, but your family and the forces behind you will not be able to escape punishment. The old man who had spoken first continued to speak, his tone filled with superiority and unquestionable authority. His gaze swept across Tai Xing and the others, causing their hearts to turn cold and their faces to turn ashen. Haha. Suddenly, Lu Ming laughed and stomped his foot on Wu Tsong's face, causing him to scream in pain. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly as he looked coldly at the old man from the Heavenly Sword faction. Guilty? Not pursue the matter? What a joke! What right do you have to pursue this? We're the ones who should be held accountable. A disciple of the Heavenly Martial Sword faction killed someone in the sacred city for no reason. We, the law enforcement army, enforce the law impartially and represent the current Saint Emperor in enforcing the law. Yet, your Heavenly Martial Sword faction has come to the law enforcement hall to kill. Not putting the current Sage Emperor in his eyes? Do you really think that there's no one else in the royal family? The elder from the Heavenly Martial Sword faction was shocked when he heard that. He looked at Wu Tsong, who was still at Lu Ming's feet, and his expression turned ugly. Lu Ming had used the royal family and the Sage Emperor to suppress them. Even if they really did not care about the royal family, they could not say it out loud. After all, the ancient Saint dynasty was still in charge of the world. Furthermore, they were still in the sacred city, within the core territory of the ancient Saint dynasty. No matter how arrogant the Heavenly Martial Sword sect was, they had to be wary of them. Brat, what do I have to do for you to let them go? The old man who spoke first said coldly and glanced at Wu Tsong and the others. Wu Tsong, a second-class Heaven's favorite, had the potential to become a martial emperor in the future. They could not afford to lose him. They planned to save Wu Tsong first. Let them go? Fine, but since they have committed a crime, they should be punished. How about this? Use raw stones to redeem them. 500,000 raw stones for each of the three trash. 2 million raw stones it is. Lu Ming said indifferently. As soon as he said that, the entire place burst into an uproar. Extortion. This was blatant extortion. This puny commander of the law enforcement army actually dared to extort an expert from the Heavenly Martial Sword faction. He was simply blinded by wealth and audacious. He didn't know what death was. The three elders of the Heavenly Martial Sword faction were also infuriated. Their eyes even turned red. Even though they had lived for thousands of years, they had never met such a bold person. To think that he would try to extort them, the Heavenly Martial Sword faction. He was simply courting death. Evil beast, I'll kill you. The elder who spoke first was so angry that he could not hold it in any longer. With a long howl, a terrifying sword chi condensed and slashed towards Lu Ming. Fourth level of the spiritual god realm. The old man who attacked was a fourth-level spiritual god realm expert. His combat strength was several times stronger than Wu Tsong's. Lu Ming's glabella glowed and a small fiery red pagoda appeared. Then it rapidly grew in size. This small pagoda was the spirit weapon that Lu Ming had obtained from the Saint Mansion's secret realm. After so many days of refinement, Lu Ming had already begun to refine it. The aura of the spirit weapon had also been completely concealed, and outsiders could not sense it at all. Lu Ming wanted to take this opportunity to test the power of the small pagoda. Anyway, there were countless tower-shaped spirit weapons in the world. Lu Ming was not afraid of being recognized. He just had to restrain his aura. Lu Ming grabbed the tower and smashed it at the sword gleam. Lu Ming said indifferently, "Phew." The elder's eyes were filled with killing intent, but Lu Ming looked at him indifferently, without the slightest fear. In the end, the Heavenly Martial Sword faction had no choice but to give in. For the sake of their reputation, they could only take out another 500,000 Oriroks. "You trash, take them away." Lu Ming waved his hand. Wu Tsang and 3 other disciples of the Heavenly Martial Sword faction flew into the air. An elder waved his hand and took it. He stared at Lu Ming coldly and said, "You, very good, very good. I hope you will stay in the Holy City forever, in the law enforcement army." With that, he snorted coldly, turned into 3 sword lights, and disappeared. Who? The crowd of onlookers let out a long sigh of relief. There was still a look of disbelief in their eyes. This matter had actually ended like this. The elder of the Heavenly Martial Sword faction had come with a strong force, but in the end, he had left with his tail between his legs, leaving behind a few million raw stones. No one had expected this to be the result. Everyone's gaze eventually landed on Lu Ming, this impressive commander. Before this, no one would have paid any attention to a mere commander of the law enforcement army. However, he had now attracted everyone's attention. First, he used his strong combat strength to suppress Wu Tsang. Later on, he even blocked an attack from a 4th-level spiritual god realm expert. Although Lu Ming used a treasure, it also proved his powerful combat ability. But what was more important was his courage and his mind. He dared to go up against an elder of the Heavenly Martial Sword faction alone, and was skilled at using the power of the royal family, the Xie clan, and even the ancient Saint Emperor who had created the law enforcement army to force the elder of the Heavenly Martial Sword faction to retreat in defeat. He really couldn't believe that all of this had been done by this bearded man. With such means, if he was 10 years younger, he would be able to compete with all the heroes in the world. Let's go." In the air, the middle-aged royal uncle glanced at Xie Jin, then his gaze fell on Lu Ming. "What's your name?" the middle-aged imperial uncle asked. "Bright Road." Lu Ming replied in a neither humble nor arrogant manner. "Bright Road? Good, you're very good." The middle-aged imperial uncle said, "Good," a few times, then waved his hand and left. "Malicious intent towards me." Lu Ming looked at the sky, deep in thought. The middle-aged imperial uncle said, "Good," several times. Lu Ming did not feel the slightest bit of kindness. Instead, he felt malice. After a few thoughts, Lu Ming's face revealed a cold smile. He could roughly guess why the middle-aged imperial uncle had ill intentions towards him. Right now, the ancient Saint dynasty wanted to form an alliance and work together with some of the overlords to increase their strength. However, although Lu Ming's actions today seemed to have protected the dignity of the royal family, he had also offended the Heavenly Martial Sword sect. Furthermore, he was forcing the royal family to offend the Heavenly Martial Sword sect. In the future, it would be even more difficult for the royal family to befriend the Heavenly Martial Sword sect. The middle-aged imperial uncle naturally did not have a good impression of Lu Ming. In his heart, he could not wait to kill Lu Ming, this meddlesome person, with one slap. Lu Ming smiled faintly. He didn't mind. After all, he had joined the Imperial Dragon Guards and then the law enforcement army only because he wanted to use this identity to investigate Xian Yanqing's whereabouts. Once he found Xian Yanqing, he would just leave without a word. Who would be able to find him? Mighty, mighty commander. At this time, the most excited ones were the law enforcement army. Chapter 1111. 1111 The Million-Year Sacrifice begins. The commander is invincible. The commander is mighty. The mighty Commander Ming. In the beginning, it was Tai Xing and the others who were shouting. Later on, the other law enforcement soldiers of the law enforcement hall also started to shout. Lu Ming raised his hands and everyone quieted down. Brothers of the law enforcement army, I thank you for your help this time. Lu Ming cupped his fists and said. The appearance of the 9 law enforcement flags was also a form of deterrence. Commander Ming, you're too kind. It's you who let our law enforcement army hold our heads high and let out the breath of suffocation in our hearts. We should be the ones thanking you. That's right, we should thank you. The others chimed in. Everyone is too polite. Since everyone is here today, I will treat everyone. Let's have a good time. Tai Xing, bring some brothers and go buy some wine and food. Lu Ming took out some rough stones and handed them to Tai Xing. All right. Tai Xing took the raw stone and brought a few people out in a hurry. At this time, the crowd in the sky also dispersed one by one. Not long after, all of them had left. But today's events spread like a storm. This time, it wasn't the same as the Huang family's matter last time. Last time, the Huang family only attracted a few people's attention and became a topic of discussion after tea and meals. This time, it was against the Overlord faction, the Heavenly Martial Sword faction. Naturally, it caused a commotion. As for the awesome Commander Minglu, his reputation was so great that some people even judged him as the most awesome commander of the law enforcement army in 30,000 years. Soon, Tai Xing bought a large amount of food and wine. A banquet was held in the law enforcement hall, and there were more than 1,000 law enforcement soldiers drinking and chatting in the law enforcement hall. They only left late at night. Tai Xing, there are 500,000 raw stones here. Take them and share them with your brothers. After the rest of the law enforcement hall's people left, Lu Ming took out a storage ring and handed it to Tai Xing. Commander, you can't do that. You risked your life to get these. We didn't make any contributions. Tai Xing waved his hands. The others also shook their heads. Although they were poor, they were still people with principles. Take it. If you guys didn't support me from behind, the people of the Heavenly Martial Sword faction wouldn't be afraid of us. Take it and split it. Lu Ming passed the storage ring to Tai Xing and returned to his room alone. He closed the door and entered the mountain and river diagram. With a wave of his hand, a huge pile of raw gemstones appeared before his eyes. It was a total of 3 million. It's time to break through to the 3rd level of the spiritual god realm. With a thought, the bloodline of the 9 dragons emerged. He opened his mouth and swallowed 100,000 raw gemstones. He began to refine them. As the raw gemstones were refined continuously, Lu Ming's cultivation level was increasing rapidly. Late stage 2nd level spiritual god realm, peak 2nd level spiritual god realm, and he began to strive for the 3rd level spiritual god realm. 3 days passed by in a flash. After refining all 3 million ori rocks, the essential core in Lu Ming's body surged unceasingly, as if there were countless true dragons roaring in his body. It took a moment before it slowly calmed down. I've finally reached the 3rd level of the spiritual god realm. However, I've also used up all 3 million raw stones. Lu Ming opened his eyes, and there was a hint of excitement in his eyes. The consumption was huge, but so were the gains. In just 3 short days, Lu Ming's cultivation had advanced from the middle 2nd level spiritual god realm to the early 3rd level spiritual god realm. This was Xie Qitian, the current Saint Emperor, a terrifying existence. Following that, many overlords of the central continent arrived one after another. Each overlord force was personally led by an emperor. Soon, more than a dozen emperors appeared on both sides of the platform in the sky. In the sacred city, countless people's eyes lit up as they looked at this scene in shock. The gathering of over a dozen emperors was too shocking and terrifying. How many years would it take for this to happen? It was too rare. Perhaps many sovereigns had gathered in the ancient city of Providence during the last Battle of Providence, but that had been in the ancient city of Providence, and ordinary people wouldn't have been able to see them. But now, there were over a dozen sovereigns in front of everyone. As for supreme beings, there were even more of them. However, they were completely overshadowed by the brilliance of the emperor. A dozen sovereigns. What kind of power was this? If they joined forces, they could really destroy the world. The heaven-suppressing divine army's 100-battle martial emperor has arrived. Suddenly, a voice rang out, and the entire place fell silent. Everyone looked in the same direction. There was a middle-aged man in black armor walking over. Behind him was a group of people. Every one of them was wearing armor. Their aura was wild and their fighting spirit was soaring. Each of them was filled with an incomparably strong battle intent, as if they were ready for a great battle at any moment. Hiss! The people of the heaven-suppressing divine army are here. Some people gasped and discussed in low voices. In the central continent, the heaven-suppressing divine army was the only force that was as powerful as the ancient Saint dynasty. The heaven-suppressing divine army was the force that hated the ancient Saint dynasty the most. The heaven-suppressing divine army used to be the strongest army of the ancient Saint dynasty. There were many powerful cultivators in it and they were invincible. Back then, they had helped the ancient Saint dynasty suppress the world and everyone was afraid of them. It was known as heaven suppression, so one could imagine how powerful it was. However, the heaven-suppressing divine army chose to watch the battle 30,000 years ago. In the end, the royal Xie family suffered a great loss, and the heaven-suppressing divine army announced that they would leave the Xie family and dominate the world. Some people said that if the heaven-suppressing divine legion had joined the battle, the royal family and the Xie family would not have suffered such heavy losses. They would not have lost control of the world, and the situation in the central continent would not have become like it was now. Therefore, the royal Xie family regarded the heaven-suppressing divine army as a traitor and an enemy. In the past 30,000 years, the two sides had had many terrible wars. However, the strength of the two sides was almost the same, and each side had suffered losses, so neither side could do anything to the other. Yang Patin, one of the top 5 young warriors, was from the heaven-suppressing divine army. Some people had guessed that the heaven-suppressing divine army wouldn't come today, but unexpectedly, they came, and the one leading them was a famous and unparalleled martial emperor. Xie Qitian's eyes glowed as he stared at the battle martial emperor. "Today we are guests. Please sit." "You're welcome." The 100 battles martial emperor said in a carefree manner and led his men to a seat at the side. The third underworld emperor of the southern underworld has arrived. The western desert's indestructible Buddha emperor has arrived. Northern Plains expert has arrived. The supreme from the eastern barren territories Empyrean God Palace, the Heavenly Corpse sect, and the Sky Demon Valley have arrived. Then, announcements were made. In the south, an emperor of the underworld of the southern underworld was approaching with a group of experts. In the west, there was an old monk with a benevolent smile on his face. He was wearing a simple kasaya and his body was covered in golden light. A wheel of Buddhist light appeared above his head. This was a Buddha, also known as the Buddha Emperor. He was an emperor. As for Northern Plains and Eastern Barren, there were no emperors. Then, tables and chairs appeared where the altar had been. The royal family, the Xie family, and the ministers all sat down. "Give me wine and pills." A voice reverberated through the entire area. Heavenly music began to play again, and at the same time, large cauldrons appeared in the palace. These cauldrons were as large as mountains, and beneath them were burly, naked men. Each of them was carrying a cauldron as they strolled through the air. Bang! Bang! These cauldrons seemed to be extremely heavy. With every step the burly men took, the space trembled, creating circles of space ripples. At a glance, there were a total of 108 burly men carrying 108 cauldrons that were as large as mountains. They stepped on the air and appeared in the sky above the sacred city. After the 108 burly men, there were 108 young women. They wore light veils and had graceful curves. Each of them was a beautiful woman with peerless beauty. Each of the 108 beautiful women was holding a purple gold gourd. "You've been bestowed with spirit wine and spirit pills. Hurry up and snatch more." The eyes of Tai Xing and the others lit up as they stared at the sky. "Pour." A voice was heard. "Let's go." The brawny men shouted. They turned the cauldron and poured the wine down. Instantly, spiritual wine poured out of the cauldron. Each of the cauldrons was as big as a mountain, and it was unknown how much spirit wine they contained. At this moment, 108 cauldrons fell at the same time, as if 108 waterfalls were falling from the sky. It was a spectacular sight. Moreover, these were all spiritual wines, not ordinary wines. They were refined from spiritual herbs and were very useful for the cultivation of martial artists. Walala! The spirit wine fell from the sky, and the rich aroma of the wine filled the entire sacred city. One could be intoxicated by it with just a sniff. Ha, it's mine. I also want one. In the sacred city, countless martial artists rushed into the sky and used their means to draw the spiritual wine to their side. During this process, one could obtain the spirit wine through various means, but one could not attack or kill others. Otherwise, one would be killed without mercy. This was the rule. No one made a move on others. No one killed each other. They only used their own methods to obtain the spiritual wine. Who? Lu Ming opened his mouth and took a deep breath. There seemed to be a vortex in his mouth. The spiritual wine in the sky gathered into a stream, and he swallowed it. As the wine entered his mouth, it immediately turned into a warm current that circulated through his body, making him feel very comfortable. This spirit wine's medicinal effects are not of much use to me. Lu Ming smiled and stopped snatching. Although this spirit wine was not of much use to spirit god martial artists, it was definitely very useful to those below the spirit god realm. Moreover, the lower the cultivation, the greater the effect. Those in the spiritual ocean and king's realm would definitely be able to increase their cultivation and condense true yuan. 108 cauldrons as large as mountains were filled with an unknown amount of spiritual wine. They filled the sky as if there was an endless supply. A heavy rain of spirit wine poured down on the entire sacred city. However, not a single drop fell to the ground. All of them had been collected by someone using true qi. Very quickly, not a single drop of spirit wine was left in the sky. Bestow the pill. Then the voice sounded again. The 108 beautiful women pulled out the lids of their gourds and poured them down. Suddenly, pills poured out of the gourd and scattered all over the sacred city. While the gourds didn't seem large, their storage space was like a storage ring. Countless pills were stored in them, and they poured down to the ground in an endless stream. Countless people's eyes lit up, and they used all their strength to collect the medicinal pills. Lu Ming waved his hand and more than 10 pills were caught in his hand. Lu Ming took a glance and realized that these pills were not of much use to him. However, they were quite useful to those below the spiritual god level. There were all kinds of pills, including those for healing, true essence recovery, detoxification, and cultivation. The number of such spiritual pills was terrifying. Chapter 11:14. 11:14. How old are you? What a big move. Lu Ming sighed. Even though the spiritual wine and the pills were not of a high grade, there was a huge amount of them. When such a terrifying amount was added together, the value was also very huge. The royal family and the Xie clan had also put in a lot of effort and capital for this sacrificial ceremony. Obviously, the royal family had been preparing for this for a long time. Otherwise, it was impossible for them to take out such a large amount of spirit wine and spirit pills at once. In the air, the people of the major forces watched with faint smiles. Not long after, the pills in the gourds were all poured out. The strong men and women carried the cauldrons and gourds and flew back to the palace. After that, young girls carrying all kinds of delicacies and wine flew out of the palace and placed them in front of the people of the major forces. Today marks the 100,000th year since the establishment of the Holy Dynasty. Thank you all for coming here and spending this day with me. Come, let me toast you all. Xie Qitian picked up his wine cup and drank with the various major forces. Following that, Xie Qitian continued, I believe everyone has heard of it. I have the intention to choose a young man to be my daughter's husband. Furthermore, all the talents from the divine wilderness continent's 5 territories have gathered here. Let's have a competition. No matter if it's a woman or not, she can participate. The first place winner will become Nianlin's husband. Of course, if the woman wins first place, Nianlin's husband will be pushed back by 1 place. At the same time, I promise to fulfill one of the conditions of the second and third place winners. As long as it's within my means, I'll do anything I can. In addition, I'll be allowed to enter the Saint Emperor's ancient hall to meditate and cultivate. Those ranked 4th to 10th will also be able to enter the ancient Saint Emperor hall. They're here. As soon as Xie Qitian said that, many people's eyes lit up. The most anticipated segment of the day had finally arrived. Xie Qitian's offer was too tempting, and not many people could resist it. Today, all of the Divine Wilderness Continent's elites were gathered together. There would definitely be an exciting battle. The Battle of Providence had taken place in the ancient city of Providence, and not many people had seen it. As such, not many people knew how exciting it was. But today he could see it. Moreover, not only were the Heaven's favorites from Central Continent here today, the Heaven's favorites from Southern Nether, Western Desert, Northern Plains and Eastern Barren were all gathered here, and there would be an even more brilliant spark. Most importantly, many of the top geniuses had entered the spiritual god realm and were about to fight for the most powerful position in the spiritual god realm. This was undoubtedly something that everyone looked forward to. Especially many young Heaven's favorites, they were all rubbing their fists, ready to show off their skills. Brother Xie, how should we compete? The Yin-Yang Emperor of the Yin-Yang Palace asked. There are too many Heaven's favorites here today. We can't compete with them one by one. First of all, they have to be below 30 years old. Then, they have to pass a round of selection. Only those who pass the selection can enter the official competition. Let's go, Xie Qitian said. With a wave of his hand, 18 paths formed by rainbow light appeared in the south of the platform. They spread out in a fan shape and were hundreds of miles long. To the north of the platform, there were tables and chairs on the east and west sides, and they were all filled with people. Only the south side of the platform had always been empty. Xie Qitian must have had his plans in mind. The selection is very simple. Everyone who passes this path will be considered to have passed. Xie Qitian said, passing through this path is considered a pass. The hearts of many moved as they looked at the 18 paths with grave expressions. Since it was a selection, it definitely wouldn't be that simple. There would definitely be obstacles on the way. Those who want to participate enter through that door. With a wave of Xie Qitian's hand, a huge door appeared at the end of the 18 paths. Chapter 1115. 1115 Chapter 1115 Kneeling down to eat dirt. Around Lu Yusen, there were 3 or 4 young men. They were clearly Lu Yusen's flower guardians. Standing in the middle of the 3 flower guardians, Lu Yusen was like a myriad of stars surrounding the moon. She was extremely cold and arrogant. She glanced at Lu Ming indifferently, her eyes revealing a slight disdain, like a proud white swan. Big Beard, what are you looking at? Are you even looking at Yusen? Why don't you take a piss and look into the mirror? You're already so old, yet you still want to sneak in and compete. Don't tell me you still want to marry Princess Nianlin? You're really a toad lusting after a swan's meat. Hurry up and get lost. Beside Lu Yusen, a few young men chided her one after another, acting all high and mighty. These few people had obviously come to the holy city later and did not know about Lu Ming's impressive achievements. Where did these wild dogs come from? Don't they know the rules and keep barking? I'm here first, so I haven't entered yet. You guys line up for me, understand? Lu Ming glanced at the few of them indifferently, his eyes filled with contempt. What did you just say? You're looking for death. Trash. The young men's faces were ghastly pale. They berated him one after another. If not for the fact that they could not fight here, they would have killed Lu Ming long ago. Lu Yusen's expression was very ugly and gloomy. Clearly, Lu Ming's words just now had included her in his scolding. This piece of trash doesn't respect the sage emperor's orders. He's clearly older than the emperor, but he still wants to sneak in. I suggest that we kill him immediately as a warning to others. A red-robed young man was the most arrogant. What if I'm not older than him? Lu Ming gave him a sidelong glance. If you're not over 30 years old, I'll immediately kneel down and eat dirt. The red-robed young man shouted. He took a closer look at Lu Ming and was even more certain that Lu Ming's age could not be lower than 30. All right, I request to test my bone age. Lu Ming shouted loudly, his voice spreading far and wide. Approved, let him take the test. A dignified voice was heard. It was Xie Qitian. The sovereigns had naturally seen everything that had happened here. Yes. An old man flew out from beside Xie Qitian. With a wave of his hand, a mirror appeared. This is the bone measuring mirror. It can measure the age of your bones. The old man explained. Then, a beam of light shot out from the bone measuring mirror and enveloped Lu Ming. At that moment, almost all eyes were on Lu Ming. Could it be that Lu Ming was really not even 30 years old? That's impossible. He looks almost 40, but his actual age must be even older. Buzz! At this moment, the bone measuring mirror trembled and 25 round wheels appeared. They shone with a golden light and filled the sky. This was a bone wheel, and one wheel represented 1 year. On the bone measuring mirror, a round wheel of 25 appeared, representing Lu Ming's age. He was only 25. Moreover, the 25th wheel was not very bright. This meant that Lu Ming was still a little away from turning 25. The scene quieted down at once. Everyone looked at Lu Ming in bewilderment, their jaws almost dropping to the ground. Nest, he's not even 25 years old. This awesome commander is actually not even 25 years old. How is this possible? He looks like he's almost 40. He's growing too fast. It's really painful to the eyes. He's not even 25 years old. Doesn't that mean he belongs to the younger generation? He suppressed Wu Tsang before. The scene was in an uproar, but after the last sentence, the scene suddenly fell silent. That's right, he was less than 25 years old and belonged to the younger generation. The key was that he had suppressed Wu Tsang. If Lu Ming was in his 30s or 40s, or even older, and he had suppressed Wu Tsang, it would not be a big deal. After all, he had been cultivating for many years. However, Lu Ming was in his 20s and was younger than Wu Tsang. It was a different story. This meant that this overpowered commander was a rare heaven's favorite, one that was even stronger than Wu Tsang. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. This awesome commander was too awesome and really exceeded everyone's expectations. It was not that no one had thought that Lu Ming was someone else in disguise. However, if he wanted to join the law enforcement army, he had to go through an identity check. He could change his appearance, but could his aura be changed too? This damned guy. Inside the door, Wu Tsang naturally saw this scene. He immediately gritted his teeth and wanted to bite Lu Ming. Some people from the Heavenly Martial Sword faction also had ugly expressions on their faces. They had suffered a great loss at the hands of this commander. Some of the sovereigns' eyes sparkled as they sized Lu Ming up curiously. Nest the commander? He's only 25 years old? Tai Xing and the others were completely stunned. If the bone measuring mirror had not measured Lu Ming's bone age, they would still find it hard to believe. Behind Lu Ming, Lu Yusin and the other young men's eyes almost popped out. The red-robed young man in particular almost bit his tongue off. Can I go in now? Lu Ming looked at the burly man who was guarding the door. You can enter, ha. The burly man guarding the door smiled awkwardly. And you, what did you say just now? If I'm not even 30 years old, you'll have to kneel and eat dirt. Let's start now. Lu Ming's gaze fell on the red-robed young man as he said coldly. I was just casually saying it. The red-robed young man's face turned red in embarrassment. Your mother's fart. Lu Ming roared and glared at the young man. The beard on his face stood up and a powerful aura burst out, enveloping the young man in red. He scolded, "What do you think this place is? All the emperors are here, and the sage emperor is on your seat. You actually dare to speak so casually in front of all the sage emperors? What do you take all the emperors for? Is this the person you're joking with? I think you want to die. Lu Ming's every word was like a huge hammer pounding on the red-robed young man's heart, causing his face to turn pale and bloodless. No, I didn't. You're talking nonsense. I didn't disrespect the emperors. The red-robed young man shook his head repeatedly, cold sweat dripping down his face. You're still denying it? Then do as you say. If you don't do it, I'll teach you. Lu Ming shouted. He moved and appeared in front of the red-robed young man all of a sudden. He pressed his big hand on the red-robed young man's shoulder. This red-robed youth was a third-grade heaven's favorite with a cultivation of great circle spirit embryo. He was worlds apart from Lu Ming and had no power to resist at all. Lu Ming pressed him down and he fell to the ground. Bang! After landing on the ground, the red-robed young man knelt down. Following that, Lu Ming pressed his head down on the ground. With a bang, the red-robed man's face smashed into the ground, causing it to shatter and his mouth to be full of dirt. Gulu! Many people in the surroundings suddenly swallowed their saliva and stared at Lu Ming with wide eyes. This awesome commander was really too overbearing. He really made the red-robed young man eat dirt. He really meant what he said. Impudent! On the west side of the platform, an old man from a large force slammed the table and shouted angrily. This force was Cold Blood Hall, and the young man in red was one of its elites. Many Cold Blood Hall members glared at Lu Ming. Don't be impatient. Standing at the front of Cold Blood Hall was the Hall Master, Blood Emperor. He spoke indifferently. He used a powerful movement technique and rushed over. He rushed past the figure's obstruction. I've made it. I've succeeded. The young man was ecstatic and ran forward. However, before he could feel happy, 3 more figures formed in front of him. Each of the 3 figures was at the first level of the spiritual god realm. 3 powerful palm forces rushed toward the young man. You can't play like this. The young man shouted and was sent flying by the powerful palm force. Chapter 1117. 1117. So many powerful heaven's favorites. Southern Nether, Dark Child. Someone said in a low voice, looking at this person with fear. Dark Child was said to be an existence equivalent to the 5 big shots of Central Continent. However, he had never fought with the people of the 5 big shots, so many people were skeptical. Each of the 5 overlords of the Central Continent was an era-suppressing genius. Not everyone could reach that level. Who would believe it without seeing it with their own eyes? Boom! Suddenly, Dark Child's aura skyrocketed, and a terrifying pressure filled the air. Then whoosh! Dark Child turned into a beam of light and rushed forward at a terrifying speed. In the first stage, the figure had just struck out with a palm force when Dark Child rushed past it. His body exploded immediately, not causing any hindrance to Dark Child. In the second round, the 3 figures attacked at the same time. Their palm prints were mighty, but the result was the same as the previous figure. Dark Child rushed through them and the 3 figures exploded. Dark Child's speed wasn't affected at all. It was as if the 3 spirit god powerhouses were air. Dark Child's figure was like a stream of light. In the third stage, the 9 figures couldn't stop Dark Child's figure at all. He was also rushed through, and all 9 figures exploded. Buzz! Dark Child's figure appeared on the platform. CSI! Gasps could be heard at the scene. It was too powerful and terrifying. An ordinary first-level spiritual god realm expert was like an empty shell in front of Dark Child. He rushed past them. In the eyes of many people, Dark Child had just turned into a black stream of light. In a flash, he had arrived on the opposite side in a shockingly short time. It's too terrifying. This kind of strength far exceeds ordinary second-grade heaven's favorites. He's definitely at the level of the 5 magnates. That's right. We'll watch this. The heaven's favorites from the other territories will clash with the 5 magnates. It'll be very exciting. Dark Child's strength shocked everyone. Then I'll also set off. With a loud laugh, a young man in a golden robe stepped out. This person was dressed in gold, golden hair, golden clothes, and golden battle boots. His body emitted golden rays of light, like a small golden sun. Lion City, one of the 5 giants. Someone recognized the young man. The Lion City came from the Overlord, the Lion Tiger Hall. It was a demon race, and it was rumored that its true form was a golden lion. It had 90% of the bloodline of the divine beast, the divine sun lion, and was extremely powerful. Almost 90% of his bloodline had become a pure-blood sun divine lion. However, in the divine wilderness continent, there were almost no connate pure-blooded divine beasts. Those demon sovereigns only became pure-blooded after they broke through to the sovereign realm and underwent a transformation. However, this was a postnatal cultivation. There was still a huge difference between them and connate pure-blooded divine beasts. Lion capital, let's go together. As soon as Sherdu walked out, another young man in a 5-colored feather coat also stepped out. Everyone's heart jolted as they recognized this young man. Kong Lin, the supreme talent of the Overlord Force and the Myriad Demon Mountain. It was said that he had 90% of the bloodline of the divine beast 5 elements peacock and was extremely powerful. They were also 2 of the 5 giants of Central Continent. Of the 5 giants of Central Continent, 3 were humans and 2 were demons. Kong Lin. Sherdu looked at Kong Lin and grinned. The 2 of them looked at each other and moved almost at the same time. A 5-colored ray of light and a golden ray of light each charged towards a path. Whoosh! Whoosh! Without any pause, a light flashed past. Just like Dark Child, the spirit god existences blocking their way were directly blasted apart. They didn't stop them in the slightest. In an instant, the 2 of them appeared on the opposite platform. The 5 magnates are really amazing. Many people sighed. This was the strength of the 5 magnates. Compared to them, ordinary Heaven's favorites were far too weak. Even many of the second-grade Heaven's favorites felt powerless. I'm coming. A Buddhist name that Lu Ming was very familiar with rang out. A baby-faced monk, who had been smiling all along, stepped out. This unscrupulous monk. Lu Ming pursed his lips. Amit Ba. A clear Buddhist chant sounded. A petite figure in white clothes stepped forward and came to the road beside the unscrupulous monk. A female bodhisattva. What a beautiful female bodhisattva. Many people's eyes lit up. It was actually a nun. She was petite and dainty, wearing a pure white kasaya. Her body was filled with holy Buddhist light, like a female bodhisattva who had walked out of a painting. She was very beautiful. Even without her long black hair, she was still unparalleled and holy. People couldn't move their eyes away from her after one look. It's a pity that such a beautiful woman, no less beautiful than the 5 great beauties, is actually a female bodhisattva. Sigh. Many people sighed with regret. Hee, the 2 bald donkeys of the western desert are about to attack. Let me accompany you. With a sneer, a black-robed young man covered in black flames stepped out and appeared on the other road. Someone recognized him as one of the southern netherworld's chosen. Bang! Bang! On the other side, 2 tall figures stepped out at the same time, attracting everyone's attention. Yang Patin and Tuoba Ashur of Northern Plains. Ha, it's really lively. I'll go then. The monk laughed as Buddhist light emanated from his body. With a flash of light he charged forward. At the same time, the others also moved. They turned into rays of light and rushed forward. On the way, the figures of the spiritual gods were practically non-existent. In the next moment, on the opposite platform, Yang Padian, Tuoba Ashur, the unscrupulous monk, the female bodhisattva, and the young man covered in black flames all arrived at the same time. Almost everyone was shocked. How was this possible? There are so many Heaven's favorites from the 5 magnates? Many people gasped and stuttered in disbelief. Yang Patin had long been one of the 5 giants of the Central Continent. No one was surprised by this. As for Tuoba Ashur, He had fought with Yang Padian several times and his name had long spread throughout the central continent. As for the unscrupulous monk, his performance in the secret realm of the Sage Mansion of the World College had also spread, and everyone also regarded him as a heaven's pride on the level of the 5 giants. These 3 people were as expected. However, the female bodhisattva and the young man covered in black flames were also so powerful. It was shocking. Don't tell me these 2 people also have the strength of the Big 5. How can we compete then? The top 10 spots are almost taken up. Many people sighed. First, it was Dark Child, then Lion Capital, Kong Lin, and this time, there were 5 people. With such unfathomable existences, there were a total of 8 people. There were not many spots left. Then, many second-grade Heaven's favorites started to step out. Now, almost all of the second-grade geniuses had stepped into the spiritual God realm. This test was naturally not difficult for them. The second-grade Heaven's favorites all passed by. Lu Ming saw Goddess Tan Xiang, Jing Kongling, Kong Exin, Jun Yu, Divine Emperor, and some others that he did not recognize. This time, most of the Divine Wilderness Continent's elites were here. Other than a few Heaven's Pride experts from the Imperial family and the Xie family, most of the Heaven's Pride experts had participated. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.